Hey, folks, when you give somebody a gift, you want them to enjoy it immediately. You don't want it to be some massive hassle for them or for you, for that matter. Of course, I'm talking about when you give a relative or a friend, maybe a parent or a grandparent, a gift that involves any type of technology. Sometimes it ends up being more of a chore than a gift. Well, this is why you give Aura digital frames. It is honestly one of my favorite gifts to give to, well, in my case, my siblings, my parents. Why? Because Aura digital frames are so easy to set up. I mean, they look beautiful, they function really well, but they are so easy to set up. You get the Aura app for free. You can preload your photographs onto the frame to the person that you're giving them to. You can also set up the frame for their Wi-Fi. So they've got to just tell you what their Wi-Fi is and then look up in the notebook that they keep in the drawer in the kitchen with all their passwords and tell you what the password is to the Wi-Fi. It is super simple. Wirecutter calls it the best digital picture frame out there. It's a great gift, even for the most tech unsavvy people in your life. Give the perfect gift this holiday. Visit auraframes.com/majority today and get $30 off their best-selling frames. You don't have to have the box, incidentally, in hand. You can send it to them and get the code and just do it through their app. These frames sell out quickly. Get yours before they're gone. That's AURA frames, auraframes.com/majority. Use the promo code majority. Get $30 off their best-selling frame. Terms and conditions apply. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube and website descriptions. Now for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
And I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, December 20th, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, on Clarence Thomas's delicate matter, which involved money.
Shocker.
Yes. Then Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, on private equity's drowning, or devouring, I should say, of the economy. Meanwhile, Trump disqualified from the Colorado 2024 ballot, according to the Colorado Supreme Court. The decision will be stayed, though, until it is reviewed till January 4th by the U.S. Supreme Court. The UN still can't find a ceasefire resolution that the U.S. won't veto. Congress abandons Ukraine aid as talks continue to abandon asylum seekers and immigrants headed to this country. Southwest Airlines and pilot union reach a preliminary deal after years of negotiation. U.S. housing aid hits lowest level in 25 years as homelessness surges. Biden administration will ban most old-growth logging in the U.S. Tennessee introduces a bill to ban pride flags in schools.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Free speech.
EU agrees to a migration pact to make rejected asylum seekers easier to deport and to limit immigrants as a whole. New 2023 crime statistics show a precipitous drop in crime. Imagine that.
Okay, but have you seen the local news? Because I see a lot of footage.
Also, we got an update on that Target closing their stores because of crime, and you can imagine what that update is. Lastly, new report, Xi Jinping told Biden China will reunite with Taiwan. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Hump Day, and I have to admonish you for publicly saying Biden's code name, his communist code name, Chiden.
Did I say Chiden?
You did say Chiden. And that was, we were under explicit instructions.
Not to say Chiden?
Not to say Chiden, because we're the white hot spotlight right now is on Biden's communist ties to China and the payments coming through Hunter. And so...
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. Yes, that's true.
I'm just really
that's his code
disappointed
name.
in you.
Yes, I blew it. Just sort of making it right over the, just barely making to the finish line for Hump Day. Of course, we're also, I should say, we are gearing up, ladies and gentlemen, for our end of the year vacation. We're all going on vacation for 6 days. We will be back January 2nd. And we're headed off at the beginning of next week. We got some great best ofs for you. You will enjoy it. And, some like little, not just, the typical interviews, but also we've got some of the comedy interviews as well. Know that you will enjoy that. So do. We'll walk you through this Colorado ruling. It is... maybe we should. Well, we'll do that at the end of the show.
Okay.
Let's start with this clip. Let me put it this way: highly unlikely that Donald Trump won't be on the ballot for the general election. Very, very likely, almost guaranteed, he will actually be on the primary ballot in Colorado because of this stay. Because the Supreme Court doesn't have to touch it until January 4th. Then they can take however long they want to look at it, and it will inevitably be stayed during that time. You need a certain amount of advance time to have the ballot printed. Colorado primary is in March, and so I would imagine almost assuredly he will be on the ballot in the primary. But nevertheless, we will go over this question of the 14th Amendment. And then, of course, it's almost impossible to imagine that particularly this Supreme Court wouldn't allow him on the ballot. But with that said, let's talk about what he's doing while he considers himself to be a candidate for the president of the United States, which he still is. We told you the other day that over the past weekend, I guess it was Saturday, and I can't remember if he was in, I think he was in New Hampshire.
Durham. Yeah.
He talked about immigrants coming to this country and destroying the blood of our country. And he said, we've got immigrants. It's not just the countries you're thinking of down in Central America. It's also from Africa and Asia.
Right.
Destroying the blood of our country. And we watched Nancy Stokatipolopoulos. What is it?
You're confusing all of these right-wing hacks. It's Nicole, not Nancy Mace, but Nicole Malio-Stocktips, a.k.a. Malio-Takis,
okay,
who represents parts of Staten Island, and George Santos has called her Malio-Stocktips to much amusement by me.
She got some inside information while she's in Congress to make a lot of money with her stocks. And we watched a clip of her yesterday trying to justify this by saying, well, he was actually talking about policies.
Mm-hmm. Policies were coming in.
All the policies that are coming across the border from Africa and Asia, as you know. Nevertheless, here's Donald Trump repeating his line, putting, Miss Stokatipolopoulos, wherever, Stock Tippets.
Yeah.
Stock Tippets. Making her have to, I imagine she's not going to go on TV for a couple of days.
Yeah, being like, did I stutter? Did I stutter? Malio Stocktips. This is what I meant, the Nazi thing.
Here is Trump saying, Well, I did say that, but to my credit, it's my line. I didn't plagiarize.
They come from Africa. They come from Asia. They come from South America, but not just South America. They're all over the world. They dump them on the border and they pour into our country, and nobody's there to check them. And the Border Patrol's incredible, by the way. They want to do it, but they're told not to do their job. It's crazy what's going on. They're ruining our country. And it's true. They're destroying the blood of our country. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our country. They don't like it when I said that. And I never read Mein Kampf. They said, oh, Hitler said that in a much different way. No, they're coming from all over the world.
Okay. Now, just to be clear, I mean, I don't know what Hitler said it in a much different way, I guess, is like he said it in German. But and we said this the other day when we were talking about this. We don't know what's worse. The idea that he was just copying Hitler because he knows this is a extra dog whistle. I mean, what he's saying in and of itself is obviously incredibly offensive and
scary
and racist.
Yeah.
I mean, and white supremacist. I mean, all of it. To purposely lift it from Hitler is a way of signaling to his neo-Nazi fans, hey, you know, look at what I've been reading.
Right.
To just generate it on your own and have this moment of like, great minds think alike. What can I tell you? I did not take it from him. I've never even read Mein Kampf. I would imagine anyways, he probably heard it on a book on tape type of situation. But the point being that it is still so racist that you've got Republican Congress people on TV pretending he didn't say it. And then just unfortunately for them, he comes out the next day and says, oh, I did say it, but I just want to make sure I'm getting credit.
Yeah.
I didn't plagiarize it.
Trump doesn't read, like, you know, there were reports that he barely read the documents that were provided for him as president, and, you know, they had to be kept short. That was also Bush's problem, right? He wanted shorter memos.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. It seems like a pattern here. But, like, so I don't doubt that he didn't read Mein Kampf, because I don't really think Donald Trump reads very much. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have an understanding of who he's gesturing towards. And either way, we saw this when, you know, Steve Bannon, and I would not be shocked if Bannon is a part of this.
Or Stephen Miller.
Or Miller, right? Who's an actual
Let me just
white
say,
supremacist.
I did not read Mein Kampf. Now, Stephen Miller, well, of course he did. In fact, he gave me a book report and just said, give me a list of the best lines from Mein Kampf.
Yeah, Steve's Cliff's Notes are
I never read it.
Are just so good. You know, like all of this stuff screams like Stephen Miller to me. And he was on cable news fairly recently. I'm wondering if he's seeing this as an opportunity to weasel himself back in.
Oh, I'm not sure he was ever out.
Well, sure, but maybe in a more formal role. I have very little doubt in my mind that he's behind the blood comments. And so this is just more of the same. And what Trump is going to learn from his time in office is that I'm not messing around this time. I'm not going to listen to people talking about restraint, how I shouldn't use the Insurrection Act.
No more like Rex Tillerson.
No more Reince Priebus's in my administration. Yeah. No more guardrails. That's what I'm going to do if I'm president. And the guys like Stephen Miller will really be running the show that time.
We will get to more, and we will talk about that Colorado ruling later in the program. In a moment, I'm going to be talking to Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, following up on the story that we heard from another ProPublica reporter, Andy Kroll, about Leonard Leo. And this fills in some of the gaps in terms of Clarence Thomas. It's fascinating. And then we'll speak to Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, about the burgeoning private equity sort of like devouring of our economy. We'll talk to both of them in just a moment. First, a couple of words from our sponsors. This time of year, folks are obviously giving to charity. Hopefully you do it throughout the year, but nevertheless, this is a big year, a big time of the year when people are giving charitable gifts. And folks often wonder, how much of an impact does their donation give? Well, in 2007, a group of donors had that exact question. They sought out information from charities to help them answer this question, and all they ended up doing was getting, pictures or stories. They wanted data. So they created GiveWell. It's an organization providing rigorous, transparent research about the best giving opportunities they've found. GiveWell has now spent over 15 years researching charitable organizations, only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they found in global health and poverty alleviation. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of a million more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. And it's not just free for you. You make these tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell does not take a cut of that either. This is a completely free, donor-supported site, both for you as a donor and for the charities that receive your donations. This is a great site. They have all sorts of opportunities for you to give. In this instance, there are 4 main charities that they have highlighted this year. One, for example, is bed nets for malaria. And they show you how many lives you will save through these charities. For me, the one that I give to through GiveWell is direct payments for childhood vaccinations. They send $160 to families to encourage them to get their infants vaccinated. And then the families also have the opportunity to spend that money in a way that is really effective for them. There's a study out, actually, just I saw today in San Francisco about paying homeless people money directly. And it's a much more effective way of doing it. And so this is a twofer. That's the one that I choose, but you should go, you read the research, you see which one you like. And the great thing about GiveWell is they do all their, you can see all of the research they've done for the past 15 years and the different charities they have supported over the course of that time. And they even have like a vertical where they talk about the mistakes they've made. Maybe they forgot to put up this research or that research. It really is an incredibly transparent site. If you have never donated through GiveWell before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org, pick podcast, enter Majority Report with Sam Seder at the checkout. That way they know that you heard about GiveWell from the Majority Report, and then you will get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. So another sponsor today. I took my 4 pills of pills. Is that what they call them?
Yeah, supplements, but they're pills.
Yeah, but they're not in pill form. They're in capsule form. Took my 4 capsules this morning of Nutrafol. What is Nutrafol? Nutrafol provides a whole body health approach for men that promotes healthier hair. No drugs, no compromises, just better hair. You do not have to choose between your health and your hair. They came to us years ago to sponsor the show. At the time, I was like, I don't need this. I asked folks around the office. Nobody said yes.
No one specific.
But then they came back to us, I don't know, maybe it was about a year ago. And Emma had a story of a friend who really had success with Nutrafol. I had a story of a friend who had success with Nutrafol, and I was like, I'm going to try it. I'm starting to go a little thinning on this side, and so I figured, why not? Nutrafol's hair growth supplements, they are physician formulated. They use 100% drug-free ingredients. Their patented technology provides consistent, reliable results without compromising your sex life. Now, some supplements rely solely on ingredient studies. Nutrafol clinically tests the final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 84% of men showed improvement in their hair after 6 months taking Nutrafol's Men Hair Growth Supplement. You can take their hair wellness quiz at Nutrafol.com/men, and they'll give you a personalized hair health plan based upon your specific root causes. No pun intended. With Nutrafol, building hair growth routine is simple. You purchase online, no prescription or doctor's visits are required. Free shipping, automated deliveries, ensure you'll never miss a day. You will see results, if like 84% of you anyways, in 3 to 6 months. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand. Over 1 million people seeing thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding. Take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For limited time, Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. It's TMR for the Majority Report, TMR. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men. Enter the promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com/men, promo code TMR. Link, of course, in the podcast and YouTube description. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Joshua Kaplan, reporter at ProPublica, on a very delicate matter involving Clarence Thomas. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigland on the Majority Report. Joining us now, Joshua Kaplan. He is a reporter at ProPublica. Welcome to the program, Josh.
Thanks for having me on.
Josh, we spoke to Andy Kroll, I guess it was maybe a week or two ago, I can't remember, who had written this, or one of the writers on this piece that ProPublica did on Leonard Leo. And in that piece, there was a couple of lines in reference to Leonard Leo getting the sense that some of the Supreme Court justices, particularly Clarence Thomas and Scalia maybe, felt oppressed by the criticism they were getting and the lack of money that they were making. Supreme Court justices make $300,000 a year, but of course you've got to, you've got all sorts of expenses, I guess, associated with that. You've got to buy that yellow note paper, the legal pads, and et cetera, et cetera. And then you guys followed up with this story. It is amazing because it really provides insight to this dynamic. And let me just say also at the top of this, before you get into telling us what it was, I read that part of the way that the court packing thing didn't happen under FDR was the idea of increasing the pensions of Supreme Court justices at that time because they did not have very good pensions. And there was no encouragement for them to leave because they needed the money to stay in the job.
Yeah.
And by increasing pensions, it basically said, like, now's the time to enjoy your golden years. And this is sort of the inverse of that. It's fascinating. Tell us where this story starts.
Yeah, so we got our hands on some documents and other new materials that gave us this rare window into Justice Thomas's financial situation during a really crucial period in his tenure. About 10 years after he joined the court, when his relationships with these set of billionaire benefactors were really starting to blossom. And Thomas had become frustrated with his finances in that period, we learned. And we found that on multiple occasions, Thomas was privately pushing for more ways to make money, higher salaries, letting judges start giving paid speeches on the side. And those efforts, they weren't successful, but there is a certain frankness to some of this that has never really become public before. So, for instance, in one instance, Thomas was on the flight home from a conservative conference, and he happened to be seated next to a Republican congressman. And he gave him a warning that left the congressman afraid Thomas was going to resign soon. Thomas told him that Congress needed to give Supreme Court justices a raise, or else one or more justices would soon step down, maybe even within the next year.
And what year was that?
That's 2000.
2000. And so it was unclear who was going to be the president, right? Or is that, we're in the middle of a campaign. Yep. And the presumption was, it wasn't a slam dunk, but the presumption was the incumbent vice president has a very good chance of staying the president.
Yeah. And there was, we talked to, a lot of members of Congress, really prominent conservative attorneys. And there was a real fear in Capitol Hill at this time that Thomas might leave. The Senate Majority Leader at the time told us that this was a real concern that was on the table, and also this kind of chatter that friends told us was more than chatter, that Thomas was dissatisfied with his financial situation, was also circulating in conservative legal circles back then. It's fascinating because on one hand, I think it's arguable that we should be paying, frankly, every public servant more money. I think there's a pretty good argument for that, frankly, certainly because you want them to compete with the private sector so that we can, slow the revolving door and whatnot. But it's hard to sort of parse what was involved in this campaign. Because you're communicating two things, right? You're saying we're going to leave if Congress doesn't. To say that to a congressperson is a different argument than, hey, there's a lot of opportunity for Supreme Court justices to make a lot of money outside of being a Supreme Court justice. And it's good public policy to pay us more, versus this sort of veiled threat that we're going to leave if we don't get paid more, because it's not like you're talking to your direct boss, right? It's right. A weird dynamic, and it's hard to parse. Or do you have a sense from your reporting how naked was the idea of broadcasting this to somebody's going to come and rescue me here, and you guys figure out who it's going to be? I can't say definitively how far, what this crucially is, I think, is context for what was to come, which, as we've been reporting all year, in the 2000s and the 2010s, Thomas accepted a stream of expensive gifts from wealthy businessmen that appears to be unprecedented in the modern history of the Supreme Court, and mostly happened in secret. We're talking likely millions of dollars in value here, from private school tuition to luxury vacations around the world and private jet flights to pretty ordinary living expenses like tires. And some of these gifts were coming from people he had met very, very soon after they'd first met Justice Thomas. And while we discovered a lot about the gifts, there's still a lot we don't know about how and why this all happened, and precisely what led so many people to offer Thomas money and other gifts over the years. And so I think understanding how Thomas was viewing his financial situation and how he was talking about his financial situation in those early years is really important context.
Who was the point person for conservative like justices in this country at that time, and I think and now? So in other words, like if I'm a congressperson, a conservative congressperson, right? Because he's not calling up, let's say, Barney Frank at the time and saying, hey man, he's talking to conservative lawmakers, and he's complaining to them and making sure that everybody knows I could leave because I need more cash. Who would these Congress people go to if they couldn't get legislation? And do we have any evidence that they even attempted legislation at that point? I guess is one question. Who would they go to? It would have been Leonard Leo, yes?
I mean, he was, the Federalist Society is certainly the kind of preeminent conservative legal organization at that stage. And it was pretty in its early days still, in terms of, it wasn't the kind of, it was very influential, but it wasn't anything close to the monolith that is today. And we don't know that, the congressman in that story I was telling earlier, that he ever spoke to Leo, for instance. But in terms of, who was really engaged on this, one of the things that's so striking about that is this congressman, he was a vocal conservative. He'd been on the Hill for a while. He had a bit of a relationship with Thomas, but he had no engagement on these issues prior to this. He was not on the kind of relevant committees. He's not the sort of go-to person, which suggests that Thomas was talking about this with fairly freely, maybe. And this just happened to be the one that was very well documented, and we were able to get our hands on those documents. And also, I mean, there's several. For instance, this congressman, he gave a speech on the House floor about inflation eroding district court judges' salaries after this, and he was exploring legislation. But you would never, at the time, hearing that speech, have any kind of hint of what was sparking that.
He talked about district judges, but not Supreme Court judges.
He mentioned Supreme Court judges, but it was, he was talking really about, how hard this was for district court judges. Yeah.
I mean, like with Thomas talking about it freely, is this also potentially just an effort to be like, the right people and you can talk to the right people?
I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah,
and there's still huge open questions, hanging over all of this.
Yeah.
At one point, you report several people close to Thomas told ProPublica they believed that it was implausible the justice would ever retire early, and that he may have exaggerated his concerns to bolster the case for a raise. What do you make of that? I mean, they've made this argument that he was just looking for to bolster a case for a raise. But I mean, this is, again, it's not like this is an internal issue, right? Like, this is a public policy question. Maybe it would have been untoward for the justices to come out publicly to do that, but it's not inconceivable that if you really wanted to make it like a raise situation, like that was the most important thing. Because, I mean, it's not inconceivable. You get a 25% raise, which would be, basically the equivalent of $400,000 total at that point. But you would say, it seems to me, if it was you were advocating for a raise, you would be able to pick up the phone and call the judiciary, somebody you knew on the judiciary. You don't even have to know them. You're a Supreme Court justice, and say, you should have hearings and maybe have a statement from the Supreme Court. Like, had it been about a raise, there would have been a more sort of like public policy style debate about this, it seems to me, right? Or no?
I mean, Yeah, I mean, to be clear, what these people were saying was essentially that they didn't think Thomas meant it when he said he might step down, and he might not have. I mean, he apparently likes to tell people he, wants to die on the court, and so maybe he was calculating. They were saying that by raising this threat, this the specter of losing this conservative icon, it would get a little more juice into his push to get more money, which it did. It scared.
Well, that's my point. Is it
right?
There's a raise for your job, and then there's all of a sudden I have a lot of really wealthy friends who are offering to buy my mom a house, to pay for my essentially adopted child's private school, to send me on trips, to put me on private jets. I mean, presumably we know about this stuff now. A lot of it we didn't know until you guys did this reporting. Theoretically, there could be other stuff out there we don't know about. But there's a difference between a raise from my job and all of a sudden I have just a bunch of benefactors. Yeah. And lucky, what a stroke of luck. And I should also add, when did Ginny Thomas start getting these jobs that she has, working for the Heritage Foundation or Hillsdale and all of these conservative organizations that have paid her a very significant salary over the years?
Yeah, that was right around this time. She was a Hill staffer for most of the 90s, but in the late 90s, she left to start working for Heritage and then bounced around to Hillsdale, eventually started her own consulting company, which...
Has that been successful?
It's a complete black box. It's one of the great ways that the federal disclosure laws are set up is that since she made it an LLC, we know nothing about it. We don't know how much money went in. We don't know who she's worked for. The Post had a great story, if people haven't read it, earlier this year, about how Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society kind of had this directed, I think it was another $25,000 to Ginny. And he arranged it in this way so that there'd be no fingerprints to him or to his organizations on that payment. And in the memo or email where he was directing this money to go to her, he said, no mention of Ginny, of course.
Well, this is also around the time I just was reminded that and you talked about the disclosures of some of this in the piece, that basically, I think around 2004, the LA Times reported on some of the things that Thomas had disclosed about the gifts that he'd received from wealthy benefactors. And the lesson he took from that LA Times story in around 2004, if my recollection serves me, was, I'm just going to still keep taking the gifts, but I'm just going to stop disclosing it.
Yeah, I mean, and we don't know what, it's actually right around this period. It's a little earlier than that LA Times piece that we start seeing undisclosed gifts. It's around the year 2000 that there's the first luxury vacation that we know about that didn't make it into his disclosure forms. And in the 90s, when he was doing, when he was going on trips like this, as far as we know, he was telling the public. But right around this period where this conversation happened, he goes to Russia on Harlan Crowe's private jet and goes on this cruise on his yacht through the Baltics. And other stuff like that is starting to happen too. And how he made that decision to stop disclosing these things is completely unclear.
There's a lot of really odd coincidences about the sequencing of this stuff, Josh. He broadcasts to everybody in the conservative movement that he can that he's has an income deficiency, and then suddenly, luckily for him, his wife gets a job at a conservative think tank, which leads to other things, and he starts meeting all these people I guess it takes a couple of years before you settle in at work until you start meeting like some of your new friends, I guess, and get paid. I mean, is there any, do you know how much of this may come up in the context of, I mean, I know the last I heard from the Senate Judiciary was that they were going to subpoena Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo. I don't know if they're going to decide to show up, frankly. But I wonder how much of this reporting, if you have any of awareness, is being looked at by at least the Democrats on the Senate Judiciary Committee, because this timeline is, like I say, either just shockingly coincidental or very, very damning. And it really does just seem to be like basically let's make sure this guy doesn't quit and he's happy, he's complaining, needs more money, and we're just going to deliver it through outside sources.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the next steps are for the Senate investigation. I mean, they have been trying for months now to get a more comprehensive accounting of these gifts, and rather than what me and a couple colleagues were able to find. And so far, Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo have both stonewalled them. The subpoenas really change, I think, that calculus. Certainly, at least until relatively recently, most people were very afraid to play around with a Senate subpoena. Although, with the current kind of partisan political environment, they might, as you said, they might be able to just blow it off, essentially. And I mean, I think important thing to underscore here is that this is, I think the root issue in all of this is that the Supreme Court, has less oversight, less accountability, less rules about ethics than really just about any other part of the federal government. And, most places there would be processes for finding this out, and it also simply would not be allowed.
Well, just before we let you go, what do you feel like is the next piece of this puzzle that we might hear about?
We're still actively reporting on all fronts. I mean, and online justices too, because Thomas has, as far as we know, doing this at a scale that is, kind of well beyond what any of the other justices are, but we don't know what we don't know. And in terms of how this all unfolded, and how we got to, where we are right now, we still have more questions than answers, and are very much trying to answer them.
Josh Kaplan, reporter of ProPublica, great piece. We will link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, on the secretive industry devouring the U.S. economy. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome to the program Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic, on his recent piece. I guess it's been a month or so now. The Secretive Industry Devouring the U.S. Economy. Roge, welcome to the program. I have to say that, like, over the past couple of years, I have become increasingly aware that, like, dermatologist, dentist, like, the houses around me, like everywhere I go, everything seems to have been bought by some type of private equity company that is running stuff that they have no idea. And you really lay it out. Talk to us about what has happened in terms of just like where we can see how much of the economy private equity has taken over.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sam. And I'm really happy to be here. And I think you're right. The sort of premise of the piece was not just this is happening in a few handful of places. It's that, like, the stock market itself is disappearing. So in 1996, there were about 8,000 firms listed on the US stock market. Since then, the national economy has grown by $20 million. The population is up 70 million people. And yet today, the number of public companies in the US has been virtually cut in half to about fewer than 4,000. And so the question is, like, how can that be? What is going on? And one answer is that private equity is devouring more and more of the economy. So a private equity firm, for your listeners are probably well aware.
That was my next question.
Just give us a sense. It's basically a fund that takes, some investor money, a bunch of borrowed money, and then uses it to buy a majority stake in a company with the goal of reselling it at a profit a few years later. And in doing so, the fund takes that company private. So if the company was publicly traded, it's no longer publicly traded. If the company was private, well, now it has no reason to go public. And the difference is really crucial, right? Because public companies have to disclose all kinds of information, from who owns them to how they make their money to their legal liabilities. Private companies don't have to basically reveal any of that. And as you were saying, that didn't matter when private equity was this niche industry, but that really isn't the case anymore. So in 2000, private equity firms managed about 4% of corporate equity, worth around $770 billion. Today, they manage nearly a fifth, worth over $12 trillion.
Wow.
And so you've probably heard of a lot of these companies, right? That private equity has taken from public to private. Hilton, PetSmart, Toys R Us, Petco, the list goes on. And the sort of point of the piece is that, like, this is worrying even if you've never bought a stock in your life, because it means a fifth of our economy is functionally operating in the shadows, effectively invisible to investors, to regulators, and ultimately the public. And that we know from history that that's is a recipe for disaster.
All right. I want to get to the disclosure aspects of it and the transparency aspects in a minute, but so what kind of firms are we talking about? Like, is Bain Capital, is that a private equity firm? And if so, can you walk us through? Because I remember what happened with Toys R Us. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that this is, a lot of, maybe not a lot of wealthy people, maybe just a few wealthy people, maybe a few core wealthy people, and then, some other wealthy people put in a little bit. And then what they do is they borrow a lot of money, but they put it on the ledger of the company they're borrowing, right? And exactly. So walk us through this, because this is, it seems like a cool party trick, but the implications of it in terms of workers, in terms of the community, arguably in terms of consumers, but really in terms of like workers in the community, it is really stunning. So we walk us through how that process works.
Yeah. So basically, these are firms. You mentioned Bain, which is a little bit different, but these are firms like you've probably heard of: KKR, Apollo, Carlyle Group, Blackstone. And what basically happens is they get their money from what are called institutional investors. So these are pension funds, these are university endowments, these are sovereign wealth funds. And essentially, there is for a long time, the sort of deal was in American capitalism that if you wanted to raise a lot of money from the public, you had to, disclose a lot of information about yourselves for a lot of reasons that there's a loophole created. So these companies raise a huge amount of money. And what they basically do is they then go to, a bank, a non-bank lender, increasingly a private credit, which is a whole new industry. They say, look, we have this money. We want to buy this company, a majority stake in this company. And look, we have this track record of being able to turn around companies. So they raise a lot of money from banks. They put all of that debt, as you said, on the ledger of the company that they just bought. And their sort of business pitch is, we make these companies more efficient. We make them better. In a matter of years, this company is going to be more profitable, and we're going to be able to resell it to another private equity firm, or maybe we'll take it public again at a higher price. I think what you're getting at is, in reality, this ends up often being a disaster. A lot of these, what you see basically time and time again, and there are study after study showing this across industries, that these private equity firms, one, systematically bankrupt companies, taking advantage of loopholes in bankruptcy law in order to basically slough off pension obligations onto the taxpayers. So that's one thing that they do. But time and time again, what you see is they jack up prices, reduce the quality of services. And in an industry like nursing homes, for example, which private equity has bought a lot of in the last few decades, those consequences, they can have life or death stakes, right? So the private equity investment in nursing homes went from $5 billion in 2000 to around $100 billion today. And what you basically see over that time is stories of patients being overprescribed drugs and have rushed to the hospital, bedside call buttons be so poorly attended that patients soil themselves waiting. And that's because these private equity funds are trying to squeeze so much profit any way that they can. And in doing so, are really cutting back on the quality of services, even as they raise prices. There was one study in 2021 that found that between 2005 and 2017, so a 12-year period, private equity ownership of nursing homes was responsible for 22,000 excess deaths. So nursing homes, right, aren't angels. Public companies aren't angels. But even relative to the normal average nursing home, there was 22,000 excess deaths, and this was before COVID. And so the whole sort of point that I'm trying to get at with this piece is that, if companies are going to be able to do this, and part of the reason that they're able to do this is because we don't know anything about them. They know that they can get away with this because it takes, the only reason we even know about any of these horrors in the nursing home industry is because of painstaking work by journalists, by researchers. And if we had had more public disclosure, regulators, could have been acting a decade earlier, and instead of all the experimentation and harm that we've been seeing.
Well, I mean,
I just want to hit this point because the nursing homes are the most explicit of examples of this, and we also, for every person excess death, we don't know how many people are being overprescribed. I mean, they come in, they cut the staffing, they have minimal staff, they have X number of patients per staff member. It's hard for them to control. You want to make sure that maybe people aren't getting up and walking out, or that someone's not sitting in a corner, and they rely on the drugs. It's easier to do that. And the analogy in other businesses would be, we're going to slash pensions, we're going to slash payrolls, we're going to do all this stuff. We're going to invest less in R&D. We're going to invest less in inputs in terms of quality of stuff. And we have no way of knowing, because they're just basically, this is completely extractive, and society is not aware of how much being extracted because of the lack of transparency. So we don't know that we need government regulation. We don't know, because they don't have to pay that many shareholders. There isn't sort of widespread problems like, hey, this company's going down the tubes. It doesn't matter because the half dozen of us who have put in the most money, we're making cash. We don't care. It's just all extractive.
Exactly. And to give you one other example. So nursing homes, again, are the most explicit example. Some of the reporting I did for this piece was around the oil and gas industry. And it turns out that it's over a 10-year period from about 2010 to about 2020, private equity firms put about $1.1 trillion of investment into the energy sector, 80% of which was fossil fuels. That is more than the market share of Exxon, Chevron, and Shell combined, right? So, and what these companies are basically doing is they're buying the dirtiest oil and gas assets that not even the fossil fuel companies want to touch. So Hillcorp, which is a company owned by the Carlyle Group, became the largest emitter of methane in 2020. So like, well, why is this happening? Why all of these public companies, they disclose scope 1 emissions. So they're under all this pressure from their shareholders, all this pressure from society to, they're not doing the best job of it, but to get rid of some of their dirtiest assets. Private equity firms, because there's no oversight, because they have no obligation to disclose anything accurately, they're the ones saying, well, instead of retiring these assets, sell them to us for cheap, and we'll just continue to pump them out. And so you see this in oil and gas. There are studies showing that for-profit colleges are being bought up by private equity with more student debt and higher tuition costs. You see this in real estate. You see this with mass layoffs in retail. It's happening all across the economy.
Yeah, I want to get to the real estate piece as well, because I still have this ringing in my mind. We had Brian Grimm of The Intercept on maybe 2 years at this point about private equity and their role in the commercial real estate industry, which is very scary for the future of the economy. But I'll put that to the aside for a second. Like, this is a bit of a facile point, but I've been watching The Sopranos, right? And there's a storyline where a guy has a gambling addiction, takes on a bunch of debt, and the mob
hardware store, or
sporting goods store, right? And the mafia buys says, okay, because of your debt, we are going to take over your sporting goods store, your fishing store, gut it for parts, make ourselves rich, and then we'll leave you bankrupt. We'll leave you without your store anymore, and you can move on with your life, right? That's functionally the exact same role that private equity plays in our economy. Glorified mobsters. And like in my ideal economy, this kind of crap would be outlawed because it's criminal and gutting, if I were to restructure the economy in this way, just to hammer this point home of how little value this actually adds to our society. In fact, it creates this negative outcome, all to essentially get these partners at private equity firms to get big bonuses, big salaries, which you touch on in your piece, if you don't mind expanding on that part.
Yeah, I think you're there's so much to respond to there, but I think you're right. And I will also say, I actually don't think it's just that they're contributing so little value and that they're creating harm. One of the things that was actually most scary for me writing this piece was when I started to read more about the financial side of things, right? So a quick little bit of history. In the wake of the great financial crisis, right, Congress comes in and passes all of these new regulations that limit the ability of traditional banks to make these kind of highly leveraged, high-risk loans, right? The kind of loans you make to private equity funds. But the appetite for those loans doesn't go away. And so what you see over the subsequent decade is really a migration of that high risk lending from highly regulated banks to completely unregulated non-bank lenders, right, quote unquote. And one of these areas is the so-called private credit industry. And so this was worth about $300 billion in 2010. It's worth about $1.5 trillion today. And what it is these private funds, many of which are run by the same companies who own private equity funds, so like your KKRs, your Carlyles, and they make these extremely risky loans to private equity firms, among other sort of places. And when you talk to banking experts about this, the striking thing is the way this industry has all the core ingredients of a financial crisis waiting to happen, right? So I usually think about 3 ingredients to a financial crisis, right? 1 is lots of leverage, lots of debt, so check. 2 is conflicts of interest. Again, a lot of these creditors are the same institutions that are then taking these loans to do leverage buyouts, which means it's very possible a lot of these loans aren't going through the same level of scrutiny that you'd expect. And then the third ingredient is the one we've been talking about, opacity, right? Traditional banks have to reveal all kinds of information about the size of their loans, the performance of those loans, whether they can pass a stress test. Private credit lenders don't have to reveal any of that. And so you put all of this together, and it's not that these companies are just causing systematic harm. They're not just mobsters. they're also possibly creating the perfect financial tinderbox. And so then you take into account, the fact that interest rates are rising, and it feels like a recipe for disaster.
I have some other questions, but on this point, how is that? Would that be as systemic though? I mean, look, I mean, as the financial crisis. I mean, the financial crisis was problematic because it's systemic, because these were all public entities, and because they were able to sort of do second and third level leveraging of these securities, and so everything got intertwined within sort of like the sort of more vanilla versions of commercial banking. Is this sequestered because it's all just basically rich people self-dealing with each other? I mean, it would without a doubt end up like in job losses, and perhaps like leaving some towns without a dentist, or because they have driven out the other. But in terms of like a systemic financial crisis, how would it be a systemic financial crisis if they went, or would it be just like, oh, some very big players lost a lot of money? Now, of course, they have the power maybe to get Congress to bail them out, but it's not necessarily represent the. It doesn't. I'm not clear on what the systemic threat to the rest of us would be.
I'm so glad you went there, Sam, because that's where I was going to go next. Because when you talk to people in this industry, they make the same point, right? They make this point. Look, the problem with 2008, and I'm not saying this is anywhere near 2008, was that banks have ordinary depositors. That's ordinary people. And so if you get some kind of crisis, that is going to tether out, that's going to extrapolate up to the ripple out to the real economy. And private equity funds, right, they get their money from pension funds, they get their money from institutional investors. So that doesn't pose as much of a systemic risk. And that it's very possible that that's true. But then you get on the phone with some of these experts who are studying the industry closely, and they say, well, actually, we don't know. That's the whole problem. There are a lot of ways in which traditional banking sector which we don't fully even understand, but has loans that are also intertwined into this space, that are making loans to these private credit firms. We don't know anything about the size of these loans, who they're going to, how much leverage is involved. And so you can sort of think like, okay, well, probably we're just fine. And it's very possible that that's true. But the problem is the opacity. We actually don't know enough to know whether we're safe or whether we're in some kind of danger. With that said, would this be anywhere near sort of a 2008 kind of scenario? No. Could it be something that could cause a lot of trouble? Possibly. We just don't know. And even the people at the heart of this don't know.
If the opacity question and the idea of like imposing some type of transparency, and I don't know what that scheme would necessarily look like, and you would hear a lot of people saying, well, this is the whole point of it being private, is that we're not public, so we don't have this responsibility. If that is a solution to the problem of what could be the exposure to a financial crisis that we have, if we were to look at these entities from a perspective of worker protection, environmental protection, consumer or just citizen of the country protection, it seems to me that there's a whole host of transparency is sort of like a second order issue, right? But we could also deploy a whole set of other regulations, it seems to me, or laws that would curb the ability of private equity to take these type of positions that cause us to worry about we don't know what's happening there.
I think you're exactly right. The only thing I would say is I would flip the two. I think transparency is the foundation for everything else, right? No matter what action you want to take, whether it's you want to put in more worker protections, whether it's you want to put in mandatory requirements for emissions, whether it's you want to change whether bankruptcy schemes and bankruptcy law, if you don't know what the companies are doing, if you don't know who's owning them, you cannot know what kind of abuses are happening. This is actually something that's coming up right now. The FTC currently has a lawsuit against a private equity fund that has been rolling up. So what private equity roll up is when they basically buy up a bunch of smaller companies, usually family-owned companies, and then use that sort of new monopoly power to raise prices. There's an FTC case right now being done in the anesthesiology industry in Texas, where there's this private equity fund that's rolling up all of these small and local anesthesiology practices and has basically doubled prices. And so they're basically, this is classic monopoly power. But the FTC is basically, one of the things they've said is one of the biggest barriers to them having, the reason they haven't brought many cases against private equity funds is they don't even know when these roll-ups are happening because these funds don't have to disclose their ownership. Right. They don't have to disclose their ownership. So any action you want to take, whether it's anti-monopoly, whether it's regulations around worker protections, you sort of need a basic foundation of transparency. It's not the answer, but it's the sort of prerequisite.
The beginning of the solution. And what would be, how would you trigger these transparency things? Because I mean, as soon as I'm thinking oh, okay, we'll just do you hit a certain number in terms of ownership entity. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to buy the number, let's say is $300 million. I'm going to go buy $299 million worth of anesthesiologist outfits. And then I'm going to start another private equity firm. And instead of calling it Sam's Private Equity, I'm going to call it Emma's Private Equity. And they're going to go and buy up another $299 billion of anesthesiology firms. And when we see each other at work, we just go we're going to raise the prices, right? Right. Yeah. And that's it. And there's no way to know that there's price fixing because we don't have that opacity. How do we do this? What is the framework that you do? You have to make that number low.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the first very core problem is just how backwards we do this compared to other countries. In almost no other advanced democracy is a company's need to disclose tied to whether they're publicly traded. Why should being on a stock market be the thing that then makes you accountable to the public? It's all based on size. Like you said, it's based on scale. It's based on how big you are, how much money you have. That in most other countries there's a minimum that you hit and then you have to disclose. I think that there are always ways people are going to be able to get around these loopholes. I think the first problem you're going to have to address is there's too many ways to get around being a publicly traded company. There are far less ways to get around, and it's far more difficult, and we have more laws around sort of scale requirements. And so if the requirement was just scale, technically you can make two different companies collude, but that's a lot harder, and we have a lot better mechanisms to stop that from happening than just a company never even coming to be publicly traded in the first place. And so I think you're really right to point that out. But I think as a basic minimum, it's just we should shift the disclosure regime from being a publicly traded company where there are all these loopholes around to just, if you are big enough to affect millions of people, thousands of people, even hundreds of people, then the public and society, you are big enough to affect society, and society should get to know what you're up to. Has there been outside of, you at the start of our conversation, you spoke about how much private equity has grown since I think the year 2000 or so, but has there been an explosive growth in just private concentration of wealth with private companies, non-publicly traded companies outside of private equity as well? Yes, that is definitely happening. So there you could think of all private companies as being private equity, which I usually, when I refer to private equity, I mostly refer to leverage buyouts. So the kind of private equity buyout model I was describing earlier, which is about 2/3 of all private companies. But then there's also venture capital. There's also sort of just private funds. So there's other companies in that mix. The numbers I cited are for private equity only, but there has been this huge rise of private companies generally, because even if you're not bought by a private firm, if you realize, well, I don't have to disclose anything, I don't have to go through all these onerous regulations, then maybe even if I'm not owned by a private company, or I'm not owned by a private equity firm, even if I'm just owned by Mark Zuckerberg, I still don't want to do this because it would just require it. Yes,
that was why Musk took Twitter private, was because of this very dynamic that you describe, or at least one of his stated psychotic reasons.
And folks in the industry will say, well, that's the whole point, right? The whole point is that there are all these onerous requirements for public companies. And by allowing companies to be private, you allow them to be more dynamic, they make more money for their investors. And at the end of the day, that's better for our economy. And then you actually look at the best studies on how much private equity funds actually return to their shareholders. So they say, we are less regulated, but that's because we're more dynamic, we make more money. And every good study on this has basically shown that until about 2000, private equity funds did slightly outperform the stock market. But basically since the year 2000, once you take into account their high fees, you're better off buying an index fund of the S&P 500 than private equity. So the entire reason that they claim to want to be exempt from these public requirements, which is that it allows them to be more dynamic, to theoretically create more jobs and value for their investors, it's not true.
Well, they create more value for a limited number of the investors is really
But
probably what's going on.
Not even them. I think a huge problem here is a lot of the investors themselves don't even have full disclosure. And the sort of what the private equity funds are able to reveal is fairly limited. Now, you might wonder, well, is the government doing anything about this? The SEC actually just came up with a new regulation called the Private Funds Rule, which now, for the first time, requires private equity funds to reveal to their own investors sort of more about their fees and about how their investors are doing. But the point sort of I would make is it's not just that small pool of investors that deserves to know what these companies are doing.
Right.
It's the rest of us. And so there is some progress being made, but it's not nearly enough.
Is there any movement? I mean, I know the answer to this already, but is there any movement statutorily to provide any more sort of transparency to what's going on, which of course, again, is the beginning. And this is why they would fight the transparency more than anything else, because once you get the transparency, then all of a sudden you're giving a game plan to anybody who says, hey, this is a problem, that's a problem. And then it's off to the races with different constituencies basically saying, we need to regulate this, we need to regulate that.
There is some movement, but right now it's mostly limited to basically industry by industry, right? So to the Biden administration's credit, HHS, Health and Human Services, recently proposed a rule that would require nursing homes to disclose additional ownership information and management information. That's great. But the problem is, right, one of the things that has actually come out recently is that already private equity funds are starting to pivot away from nursing homes and more into home health. So they realize that a lot of this, after the work of journalists and researchers and things like that, finally regulators are catching up. Now they're like, okay, now that regulators are catching up, we're going to have to make our money in other places. And so right now, this is happening on a very industry by industry basis where the harms have been most concentrated. But that doesn't tell us where the harms are going to happen next. And so what I would like to see is a more broad-based law, which would probably require some kind of congressional action, which we know is probably not going to happen right now, but there is some possibility that would require this sort of across the board instead of forcing individual agencies to try to follow whatever trail is being left by the harms that have already been committed.
Roge Karma, staff writer at The Atlantic. The piece is The Secretive Industry Devouring the U.S. Economy. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time, Teddy. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me and for the fantastic questions. It's great to be with you.
Oh, thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will have fun and take your phone calls. Oh, let's just go over this court case because
sure,
important. Oh, and I would say also, before we go over this court case, ladies and gentlemen, if you are a member of this program, you can go to majority.fm, log in as a member, and get your discount code for our merch shop at shop.majorityreportradio.com. And you will see there. Now, you're not going to get it before Christmas because it's December 20th. And Christmas is some days.
But do what I
always get confused if it's the 23rd or the 25th.
It's the 25th.
Okay. I didn't celebrate it as a kid. And
No, it's okay. I didn't mean to.
No, I mean, I know. But anyways,
yeah.
Regardless, whether it's 25th or the 23rd, and we're checking on that, you're not going to get this. But it is in the can you get up the screen? Let's check it out.
Deposit dog collars.
The dog collars, ladies and gentlemen. The Posit dog collars are now in the Majority Report shop. As everything else, they are American made, and I believe union as well. Certainly the printing is. And there they are. The two Majority Report dog collars. One is a red. $12. That's it. Three in black as well. Wait, we're only selling it for $12?
Those are great.
What are we doing? We're giving them away?
My mom's new
dog. There's no profit.
My mom's new dog needs to pause her barking, so I don't think this would be appropriate.
Folks, this is a great way to go out. I always think about dogs in the context of LA or New York. That's and people go and take their dogs to like dog parks.
Yeah.
And this is a great way to, start a conversation piece.
Oh, yeah.
If your dog is not in any way sort of like charming or entertaining, and people don't want to talk about your dog, but you want to talk to other dog owners, this is a great way to make your dog seem like they have more character.
And, like in my family, we get our dogs a little Christmas gift, okay, right? For them to open up. But you could just get them a bone and then a printout of the dog collar and say, hey, this is coming, right? Like, people do that. When the gifts are a little delayed in the mail, you print out an image of it and then you give it to the person or animal in this instance. So you can still get this for your dog for Christmas. It'll work out.
People are saying now it's supposed to say PAWSIT, PAWSIT.
Whatever.
Was it supposed to? I mean, isn't it the joke? Maybe it should have. Well, all right. I mean, it says PAWSIT. Whatever.
I mean, we have to have some brand consistency. When we get a little bit too down the pun rabbit hole.
Yeah, you'll still say pause it. I don't know.
Whoopsie.
All right, Trump. This Colorado ruling, the Colorado Supreme Court ruled yesterday that Trump is disqualified. And there's a couple of these. One's there's still like an active case in Minnesota. There's a couple of states that have heard this case. Minnesota and New Hampshire, I should say, were dismissed on procedural grounds. And I don't know if there's any other cases at the moment, but if this case was found, if it was found that he was ineligible because of federal law in Colorado or the federal constitution, you're bound to see more others. So there's a lot of stakes here. It's not just about Colorado. So here is what the Colorado Supreme Court found. You have Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and let's pop this up. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. 4 justices voted that he was ineligible. 3 said that he was that dissented and said he was eligible. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Which was, the context of that is that it was written after the Civil War to basically try to bar those who supported the Confederacy.
Exactly.
From running for higher office. They were obviously, insurrectionists in and of themselves or, coup attempters. So that's the context of this part of the amendment. Now,
the Supreme Court in Colorado was overturning a district court ruling, and the district court ruling found thusly. All right, there's 4 questions that need to be asked. Was it an insurrection when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021, trying to stop the certification of the 2020 election? Well, the district court found that yes, there was an insurrection. It was an insurrection. And then the next question they have to ask, if it was an insurrection, did Trump engage in that insurrection through his messages to supporters and his speech that morning and his Twitter posts and whatever else he did? And this is, incidentally, the district court found this even before hearing about the lies that the people who
organized,
got the permit for the original rally, they knew that there was an attempt to go down to Congress, and that would have made it even more of a slam dunk. And so the answer to that was yes. Not only was there an insurrection, but Trump was instrumental in causing that insurrection. And then the next question is, do the courts have the authority to enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment without congressional action? The district court found, yes, it does. But the last one was, does Section 3 apply to the presidency? And the district court found that it did not. And here is the language for Section 3. No person shall be a senator or a representative in Congress or elector of the president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such a disability. So forget about the Congress moving such a disability. That would basically mean, like, if let's say, for instance, somebody was running for Senate. Now, it would be very curious to see if someone wants to do this with Josh Hawley or Ted Cruz or something like that, Ron Johnson. But put that aside for a moment. If someone's going to the Senate, the 2/3 of each house could say, well, Ron Johnson was subject to all this, but we're going to allow him to come in. And so put that aside. The question is president there? Now, the argument of the district court was he's not named. Everybody else is named.
Right.
Senators are named.
Yeah.
Congress people are named. Electors are named. And people who hold any office, who have taken an oath or an officer as a member of the state legislature or executive to support the Constitution of the United States. Now, the oath for the presidency is different than it is for every other office.
Yeah.
So the real question is does "or hold any office" refer to the president of this country? Now, on one hand, it's like, well, any office, he has an office. I mean, he's the president.
It's the ultimate office, and it's odd that the section doesn't include it. Like, it seems like an oversight by the people.
Seems like it would be a weird oversight to say, like, we're doing this, but we're not going to mention president. And now maybe at the time they're like, well, Jefferson Davis, he held other offices, and so we don't need to do that. But they did not include the president. And, at least in the context of contract law, when you do enumerate some things, this many things, and you're this, but you leave out something that would obviously be enumerated if you meant to enumerate it. Now, they could have also said, this does not apply to the president. But the weird thing is this. I don't know if they could have imagined after that the president, that maybe they couldn't say that, well, I don't know. It's a weird, I mean, it doesn't say president, so maybe you can as a president. I don't know. The Supreme Court's going to overturn it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
And even if they don't, the stay and the process of appeal, unless they do a shadow docket right off the bat or whatever, it's going to take, he'll be on the ballot. The
district court found that because the presidential oath is worded differently from the oaths of the other enumerated offices, it was concluded that the broad phrase "officers of the United States" was not intended to include the presidency, and the Colorado Supreme Court disagreed. So there it is.
This is a great point in the IMs from Kowalski. I feel that, like, the president would be covered under the military clause. The president is the highest ranking military position, so wouldn't that cover the president? Because in that sense, I mean, he is the commander in chief.
I mean, maybe that will come up in the context of this argument. I don't know that it was referenced in the Colorado decision. To be fair, I haven't read that decision yet. So, but there it is. We will know more starting January 4th.
Yeah. Probably not going to really amount.
Political Pyrone writes, I'm hearing that the framers did include, well, it wouldn't have been the framers. This is the 14th Amendment. But that the people who wrote it, or framers maybe of the amendment, did include the president in early drafts, then removed. If that's true, can they consider that? I mean, yeah, the intent of Congress would, if they did include in earlier drafts and they took it out, it would show an intent to not include the president.
And then you know who's going to run with that? Every conservative on the court.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case,
then they would say, textually, the president's not included, as well as you see historical records, they made an effort not to include the president. So if that's the case, that just strengthens Trump's case, unfortunately.
We'll see. But MSND, we'll know more in January. MSDN Cedar says, gonna need a leather posit collar for me after getting a normal one for my dog. Oh, for me. Oh, I see. Okay. Folks, we're going to head into the fun half of the show. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you join the Majority Report, you not only get the free show free of commercials, you get the fun half, and you get that discount on the merch shop, which is good until December 26th. The discount is good until December 26th. So you can get a late Christmas present and tell your person that you've given it to it's on its way. Don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, featuring the Majority Report blend, which you can pick up. Use the coupon code Majority, get 10% off that delicious and cooperative coffee. Emma, ESPN.
Yes. On ESPN, we danced on the grave of Brandon Staley. We danced on the misery of the Dallas Cowboys, the Jaguars falling apart. What the hell is wrong with them? The Cinderella stories of the Rams and the Bucks as well. And just how good are those damn 49ers? I can't see them losing another game this year. And yes, I'm including the Super Bowl in that. YouTube.com/ESPN show. And Bradley, on behalf of Matt Leck.
Yeah, so I believe Matt, because he was on his way home, David took the reins for Left Reckoning last night. He spoke with Nicole Klein-Heisterkamp-Gonzalez, a PhD student in geography at Syracuse University, to discuss her research on the labor-environment nexus in Germany. So if you want to check that out, youtube.com/Left Reckoning, and you can access the postgame at patreon.com/Left Reckoning as well.
We'll be right back with the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul. I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I
got to get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back. Sam Seder, soon to be Emma Vigeland, the Majority Report. Ramona asks, are we finally going to watch the War on Christmas clip? I've got visions of sugar plums dancing in my head, and I'm getting antsy. Well, you've asked for it, and we never, ever, ever deny a request like this. Ladies and gentlemen, and I'm trying to think of when this was. I think this was in 2005. And, I was working at Air America, doing the Majority Report with Janine Garofalo. And I was trying to get on Fox News. And I knew it would be my one time to get on. But I didn't know exactly how to quite get on because I had a suspicion that I was blacklisted by Fox News.
And you're also a man because they were always inviting Janine on by your
Well, they would invite Janine on
to like beat her up over the Iraq War.
But I would get calls, and this happened for like 5 years. I would get calls from Fox News. Do you want to come on this show or that show? And then they'd call back and they would bump me, but it was always in a weird way that wasn't for breaking news. And what I subsequently found out, and I think they have this at MSNBC, I think they have it at every cable thing, is that you get booked onto a show and then you go onto a list and that gets broadcast around, and then other shows see the list, and then if you're blacklisted by them, they talk to the central booker people and they go, we don't want that guy on the network.
Yeah.
Because Sean Hannon and I did not get along. And so I had it in my head of what I would do if I ever went on to talk about the War on Christmas. This was a real thing. We talk about it now and it's sort of embers, but this was a major ongoing story about a so-called war on Christmas. And so I got invited on CNN, and you'll see what happens here. But you should also know this, that when we started the session, the guy I was on with was supposed to talk first, but he had a problem with his earpiece or something. And so they went to me first, and it made it that much worse for this guy, because here's what happened. And you'll see it's in 5:4. It's not even in full frame these days. But go ahead. This is me on CNN, I guess 15 years ago.
Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays, a Christmas tree or a holiday tree? Which should it be? Depends on whom you ask. We've seen controversy, most notably prompted by the White House. It sent out cards, this card matter of fact, wishing a holiday season of hope and happiness. No mention of Christmas. Some thoughts now on the subject. Sam Seder hosts the show Majority Report on Air America Radio. Bob Knight is the director of the Culture and Family Institute. It's affiliated with the Christian conservative organization Concerned Women for America. Gentlemen, great to have you with me.
Thanks for having us on.
All right, well, let's start with the holiday card. What do you think, Sam?
Well, listen, as far as the war on Christmas goes, I feel like we should be waging a war on Christmas. I mean, I believe that Christmas, it's almost proven that Christmas has nuclear weapons, can be an imminent threat to this country, that they have operative ties with terrorists, and I believe that we should sacrifice thousands of American lives in pursuit of this war on Christmas. And hundreds of billions of dollars of taxpayer money.
Well, Sam, is it a war on Christmas, a war on Christians, a war on over political correctness, or just a lot of people with way too much time on their hands?
Well, I would say probably, if I was to be serious about it, too much time on their hands. But I'd like to get back to the operational ties between Santa Claus and Al-Qaeda.
I don't think that exists. Bob?
Well, we have
Help
intelligence.
me out here.
We have intelligence.
You have intel. And where exactly does your intel come from?
Well, we have tortured an elf. And that's it's actually how we got the same information from al-Libi. That's exactly the same way the Bush administration got this info about the operational ties between Al-Qaeda and Saddam.
Okay, Bob Knight. Sam is tying in now the lack of information regarding weapons of mass destruction and somehow moving that into Santa Claus. Help me out here. What's going on? I mean, is this a war on Christians, a war on Christmas? Is this too much political correctness?
Yeah, well, it was first I want to compliment him on his dry humor, but this is actually a very serious subject because a lot of people are waking up to realize that the war on Christmas is really the culmination of a war on faith, and the idea that the public square has to be cleansed of any religious expression, particularly Christian religious expression. You know, at one time Happy Holidays was a welcome addition to Merry Christmas, so you wouldn't say the same thing over and over again, but a lot of people now see it as a substitute.
Pause it.
And
I feel like when I'm watching this, like I'm watching like stuff that I show Saul of like black and white, comedy movies. Like he can get through the Abbott and Costello, like who's on first bit, for a while. And then all of a sudden he's just like, why, like what's going on here? This was like a real news segment. And this was CNN. I mean, you see how
responding to Fox's.
She is like, this is a serious segment to them. Until I just like really basically take a poop on.
Well,
on the whole
I mean,
thing.
I hate to compliment you, but it was genius. And like, I just still, when he says this is actually very serious, the fact that you were able to go first and bring it back to the war in Iraq,
exactly,
it just makes him look that much sillier.
That's what really helped this. But I'm just trying to communicate to people like this was a real thing, like a real issue going on, not just one segment here. It was like an overarching story. That they were trying to tell of like this attack on Christmas and Christians. But go ahead.
Same thing over and over again, but a lot of people now see it as a substitute, and it's very gratuitous at times, and it's actually insulting when you're talking about Christmas Day or a Christmas tree, and you can't bring yourself to use the word for fear of offending someone. In the name of diversity, we're a less free country when that happens.
It's interesting, Sam, because, I mean, this is a time where, if anything, we want to be even more sensitive to diversity, considering everything that's happening with regard to war on terror. We're learning so much more about different religions, different ethnicities, and trying to become more of one versus being segregated.
Yeah, well, Kara, I mean, listen, I would like Bob to tell me who is the person who has been offended by someone saying Merry Christmas to them. I've never met that person. I don't celebrate Christmas, but if someone says Merry Christmas to me, and I either think, well, it's a little bit odd. It's like me saying happy birthday to you on my birthday, but no one cares. But I'll tell you this, as we wage the war on the war on the war on the war on Christmas on our radio show, News Corp, Fox News, those people who have started this entire war on Christmas meme, fake war, they're having a holiday party. President Bush saying happy holidays, Tokyo Rose, Laura Bush, saying happy holidays to her dogs in the video. I'm sure you've seen it. I mean, these are the things that we should be talking about when we are waging this war in Iraq. We should be equating it to the war on Christmas. What else would Bob Knight have an opportunity to do? How else would he get on television if he wasn't pretending to be attacked?
You know, this would be funny, except it is serious to a lot of people who have seen their faith cleansed from the public square systematically.
Well, are you suggesting, Bob, that someone can't celebrate Christmas in America? I mean, tell me about the person who can escape these
get a word in here?
Go ahead, Bob. Go ahead, Bob.
I'm talking about things like in Ridgeway, Wisconsin, where the school children in the public school were told they couldn't sing Silent Night. So they substituted "Oh Cold Night." You know, I think when you take Jesus out of anything, it gets pretty cold. So it's apt. But it's outrageous. They actually
he's trying to get his jokes in. But when I do it, it's just my dry humor, and there's some people take this seriously. But when you take Jesus out of it, it is a cold night. Am I right?
To be honest, I think he was feeling a little inadequate. He's like, I've got.
Oh, he had that joke written already. It wasn't that he worked that out himself.
Okay.
All right, go back just a little bit.
So they substituted "Oh Cold Night." You know, I think when you take Jesus out of anything, it gets pretty cold, so it's apt. But it's outrageous. They had children actually singing a bastardized version of Silent Night.
Well, Bob,
you see,
this may
Christmas
come as a
trees
shock to you,
called
Bob,
holiday trees.
but I don't consider Jesus the Messiah. And so if you're going to ask me to praise Jesus, I'm going to be a little offended. Well, I don't think the singing of the song that you can find other songs to sing. So what about Silent Night?
So because you're offended, none of those other kids can celebrate the great heritage of Christmas
I'm not the one who
carols
said
and
they
Christmas
couldn't do
music.
that. No, I'm not the one
See,
who
you're a
could do
Grinch,
But
sir.
you're trying to
That's all you
force.
are.
You're a
Why are you
Grinch.
trying to force conversions on people?
Let me ask you guys.
Yes, you are
singing
sir.
a Christmas carol.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you guys about the pressure that's been put on stores, for example. American Family Association called for the boycott of Target stores the weekend after Thanksgiving, accusing the chain of banning the phrase Merry Christmas from its stores, a charge that Target denies. Pressure from conservative groups.
I'm sorry. This is just exactly the same shit that we see every day now, except just substitute, oh, they don't like Christmas to they're imposing a trans agenda.
But it's
or before that, the fact that they support Black Lives Matter. We got to
it's just
boycott X,
over
Y, and
and
Z.
over again
It's
of what the
same
outrage of the
thing.
day is. I
Yes.
mean, this is the way that all of this stuff works.
I'm fascinated by what he said earlier, by rewatching this, where he's like, diversity makes our society less free, and it's like that's basically just like what Elon Musk said on Joe Rogan a few weeks
these
ago.
are.
It's just the same.
I mean,
sort
this is
of,
the point: is that like these
formulation.
themes were developed, and like you really are looking at like the early development of like any type of technology, right? Like this is back when you actually had to crank the thing to get it going, and now of course it's just a push button ignition. This is where this was the nascent. I mean. It was the next generation and the next generation, and it gets more and more mainstream. But you can see that all of this diversity stuff, right? It starts with fundamentalist religion. And then it emanates out into Joe Rogan, who's like, I don't care about religion. It's just the diversity stuff. Go ahead.
A charge that Target denies. Pressure from conservative groups look like it has an impact here. Complaints from the Catholic League. Walmart agreed to create a Christmas page on its website rather than a holiday page. And then Macy's, which is perhaps more closely associated with Christmas than any other retailer, sent activists a letter touting its use of Merry Christmas in ads and store windows after it was the target of a small-scale boycott last year. I mean, this is pretty amazing, all these boycotts of pressuring all these stores, these businesses, Bob.
Well, these businesses are taking millions and millions of dollars in from Christians in particular and others who celebrate Christmas, giving gifts in the name of the Christmas season, and yet they're so worried about offending people like my opponent here that they don't want to mention the word Christmas. People are sick and tired.
It's a holiday time. I'm not your opponent. But
Well,
I do agree with Bob.
Yeah, you are.
I do agree with Bob that I think what should happen is companies should calculate how much money they're getting from people who are celebrating Christmas and provide exactly that much amount of Merry Christmas, because that is exactly how I would want any type of religious holiday to be celebrated.
Would we be having the same argument about Hanukkah? I'm curious.
Would we have the same argument about Hanukkah?
Hanukkah is not the same as Christmas. It's not a major holiday for one thing, and this is the Christmas season. That's why billions of dollars are really being spent. It's Christmas.
Well, it's
let me
also
put
the
it in
winter
perspective
solstice
for a
season,
minute.
too.
I don't know, Bob. People
Just so
might
you-
argue that Hanukkah is just as big as Christmas.
Well, no, I would have to agree with Bob. I would have to agree with Bob on that.
And none of them says Hanukkah is as big
No,
as
Hanukkah
Christmas.
is not a high holiday. Our high
No, it's
holidays
not.
are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which I'm sure Bob has been protesting why there aren't more Yom Kippur sales or Rosh Hashanah sales. Well, I mean, why shouldn't they be, right, Bob?
Well, if that was associated with that holiday, then maybe I would join you, but it never has been.
Bob,
so
have you
it's a
ever
moot
protested
issue.
Martin Luther King Day not being celebrated? I mean, do you resent when people don't say Happy Martin Luther King Day a month out in advance?
You know what?
Look, let's put this in perspective.
Let me, and Bob, I want you to be able to respond, but what's interesting, the CNA USA Today Gallup poll, the question was, is it okay for people to say Merry Christmas? 88% said yes, 11% said no.
Yeah, well, 96% of Americans celebrate Christmas. So why would we care about the,
So what's the war,
offending
Bob?
the 4% that get offended by it? I
I
don't know
mean-
anybody who'd be offended
Well,
by someone wishing someone a Merry
Why
Christmas.
do we care? Why are we making all the changes, Bob? I mean, we do.
Yeah,
We
Bob, where's the war?
Where
are the battle lines? I mean, you can tell me that
battle line-
Silent Night
I'll
can't be
answer you if I
sung
get a minute.
in one school in Wisconsin.
that's just one example. That's not the totality. So don't.
What is
create
the
that straw
totality?
man.
The totality is 80. You brought it up. The totality is 88% of the American population has no problem with it. You don't care about the people who don't celebrate Christmas. Fine. But I don't celebrate Christmas, and I don't care. So why are we wasting everybody's time? It's so that you can fundraise. That's why, Bob.
I'd like
and
to
I
put
think
this
you know
in
that's the truth.
perspective.
Bob, I gotta let you have the final thought, Bob.
Okay. You
Oh,
know, when
no,
the Nazis
she won't.
moved into Austria in
Oh, that is
1936,
offensive, Bob.
they immediately
to raise
removed Christmas
Nazis
from the schools.
Oh, my
That is
God.
Think about it.
Hold on. Let Bob. Hold on, Sam.
You
Let Bob
can't
make
even
his
let me
point. Let
speak,
Bob
can you? You're
make his
so-
point. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, Maria Trapp wrote the story of the Trapp Singers that's in The Sound of Music. And she said she sent her kids to school after the Nazis took over, and they came home and said, Mama, we can't say the word Christmas anymore. It's now winter holiday. I think that ought to disturb people
Kira,
that we're
that's
moving toward that
offensive.
kind of attitude in this country.
The Puritans also outlawed Christmas. The founding fathers of this country would fine you in Massachusetts if you celebrated Christmas at the beginning. So don't talk about Nazis, Bob. I think that's really inappropriate. Why do you have to bring hate to this Christmas and holiday season?
Frost.
That's so sad, Bob.
Well, it's the
so
truth.
sad.
You ought to read the book yourself.
Well,
It might
Bob, it's
change
just
your mind.
sad that you have to raise Nazis when you're talking about Christmas and the holiday season. And we all know that Christmas actually, Tannenbaum, it's a German holiday. Bob, I'm really, really disappointed in you.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but if you can't understand the force of history,
To bring up
I'm not
Nazis,
calling
Bob?
you a Nazi.
Oh, God.
I'm
Oh, who are you
saying
calling
that's what
Nazis?
they did.
Gentlemen,
Who
we
are
gotta-
you calling a Nazi?
We got to
sir?
let it there.
I'm not.
We could probably
You
continue.
are, sir.
Sam Seder,
I'm offended.
Air America
you're
Radio.
seriously offended.
Bob Knight, Director of Culture and Family Institute. Gentlemen, obviously,
Kira.
hey, it's a discussion. Everyone's talking about it.
Yes,
that is
it
for sure.
is.
Or a lot of people are talking about it, I should say. Now, I'm just curious. Do I say...
You know, you really, when you get into that mode of smugness, it really is satisfying, to be honest
I
with
have
you.
to say that yes, that was like peak smugness and peak fake offended by the
I mean,
word
look at your
Nazi.
face here. Look,
Oh,
look
yes.
at
No, I'm
this little
enjoying
smirk
myself.
over there.
Yeah.
You've never been happier in your life. The fact,
I was pretty happy. Yeah. I was
okay,
pretty
so what goes through your mind when he brings up Nazis?
Well, I'm just like, I can't believe you said Nazi, sir. How could you say the word Nazi?
No, but do you not feel like incredible joy that he just walked into a trap that you didn't even know that you said?
It was like, it was honestly like, being a kid and a surprise, you can have an ice cream sundae.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and surprise, on top of that, we're going to add some extra butterscotch, stuff. And then, oh, wait a second. It seems we have a whole bowl of extra whipped cream over here. And, would you care for a couple of candies on top of that? I mean, the whole thing was, couldn't have worked out better. And it really was so much because I got the first word in on the premise of this whole thing being a joke. And so by the time this guy opens his mouth, I've already sat there and mocked the hell out of it. And they extended that
segment.
Like 5 or 10 minutes.
Well, it's good
before.
TV. I mean, I just can't believe that, you had made quite clear that you were a Jewish man repeatedly.
And he brings up Nazis.
And then he brings up Nazis. That's how
uncomfortable.
desperate that guy was.
Yeah, I think that was pretty uncomfortable for him. Let's go to, and someone made the point that is where I got the Bob that I use for the Bob on Bob's Burgers. Same almost pitch, exactly. Bob, how could you? At ATX Kid. Good morning, MR crew. Hope it's a wonderful hump day. Thank you. Brian from Chicago. Crime is down, but my entire Twitter feed is full of videos of minorities doing crime. It's definitely not because I'm liking and commenting racist stuff. It has to be the George Floyd effect.
Should we cover that?
Yes.
We've gotta.
Folks, we've had, we've covered this quite a bit. And at one point we had a debate with the real crime justice warrior, or what is it? Actual justice warrior.
Or you did, and I also, he was kind of he was Tim Pool's backup from when I debated him, because Tim needed another person to help him out.
And the gist of our argument was, he was saying that we have this massive rise in crime because of the so-called thing he made up called the George Floyd effect, which presumably caused all this massive reform and cuts to policing, or just demoralized police.
Or it's like broken windows theory, just redone essentially, right? Which is like that people saw that they could get away with being rioters and looters, and now crime is up.
Or I think he was saying it was because of police reform and we needed to hire more police because of this. I don't know.
Okay.
But one of the problems I had with his premise is I'm like, well, crime is up, but it's actually starting to fall again. And it's also conceivable that the first pandemic that we've lived through in 100 years may have, tossed and turned society a little bit and created different pressures and whatnot, and that crime is going down. He's like, that is not happening. That is not happening. It's just a tiny bit. It's not below where it was. And look at what's happening at all the retail stores. Well, CNBC actually looked at one of the biggest retail stories. That was when Target said that they were closing 9 stores because of crime to keep their employees and their customers safe. Now, we should also say that the Association of Retail Stores came out and said we had to amend our report on crime in stores and loss because it turns out that it wasn't really necessarily crime that we had this loss from. But here is this story about Target.
All right, welcome back to Power Lunch, everybody. In September, Target announced it would close 9 stores. The reason given? To prioritize worker and shopper safety. CNBC.com retail reporter Gabrielle Fonrouge has done a deep dive looking at the stores Target closed and the ones it chose to keep open. And Gabby is here on set with us now. What did you find? Was it true what they say? In other words, they were trying to prioritize worker and shopper safety, or was it something else that was behind the closures?
Tyler, if Target was trying to prioritize worker and customer safety, they would have closed the stores that are still open. What my investigation found is that the stores that Target chose to keep open in nearby locations actually had way higher crime incidents than the ones that they closed. So what we did is I pulled public records from all the police departments that saw store closures. That was going to be in Seattle, Portland, New York City, and San Francisco Bay Area. And so what you'll see is that the stores that were closest to the ones that it closed had higher crime incidents in all but one case. So we have data on 21 stores. Only one store that closed had higher crime than the one that it kept open nearby.
So why were the ones that didn't have the highest crime the ones that got closed?
So there's a lot of factors that could be at play here. And, what's important to point out
Were they
is
just underperformers?
That's what it looks like. Some of these stores were had less foot traffic than other ones. Like the San Francisco store is a really great example. The one that they kept open was in the heart of San Francisco's tourist and shopping district, right there in Union Square. It's packed. And then the one that they closed was downtown near a highway. Homeless encampments had set up nearby. It had way less foot traffic. It was just a quieter part of town. And you can see that in different parts. And there was also some cannibalization.
But it wasn't that it had higher theft.
It didn't have higher theft.
It didn't have higher theft. The
Based
one in Union Square had higher theft.
Exactly.
Higher foot traffic, more people, higher theft, compared with the one in the relative backwater where there was more homelessness, where there was less foot traffic.
Exactly. And the reason why this is a story, a retailer can close this, there's a whole lot of business reasons why a retailer may close a store. But when Target made this announcement, first of all, it's not news when a retailer closes 9 stores, especially one of Target size. They do this every single year. But they sent out a big press release saying that organized retail crime was threatening the safety of guests and employees, and for that reason, they couldn't keep the stores open anymore. And if that was really the case, then they would have closed the other stores because those appear to be a lot more dangerous.
I suppose.
Okay, there we go. So there it is, ladies and gentlemen. You have basically some executives trying to tell their shareholders it was crime's fault, not the fact that we just chose bad locations or whatnot. And this story just kept getting propelled and propelled, and we saw it in the context. Everybody was dipping in and using it. There's a crime spree across the country. There's retail outfits. This is why we're having losses. This is why we got to raise prices. Put up the other graph. And now the FBI has put out more information. Do the whole piece by Kevin Drum. Because you can see this here. Violent crime in the United States from 2012 to 2003. This also is the same, not just for murders, but other violent crime. 2023, we only have up until through September. So this is we don't have October and November in these statistics.
And I'll just say, you can't really see the y-axis part there, but it says rate per 100,000 people. That's what the numbers on the left indicate.
But the bottom line is that violent crime is down, and we should say other crimes are down as well, like carjackings and whatnot. But the raw data, here it is. According to the FBI, through September, violent crime is down 15% in big cities and down 8% overall. Murder's down 25% in big cities, 16% overall. Property crime, which was so important to crime justice warrior, is down 6% this year. Burglary is down 12%. Both property crime and violent crime are on track. And to be fair, we're not there yet, but they are on track to be at their lowest levels in, you ready? Not 1 year, not 2 years, not even going back to 2019, but 50 years. 50 years. Now, what I take from this is that there was an anomaly. Now, unless at the end of 2022, there was some structural change that happened, that had happened back in the end of 2020, let's say.
People realize how much they love cops, I guess?
Well, my point being that if there was a George Floyd effect and all these cops got demoralized and there were less cops, then for crime and that was the reason why crime shot up. For crime to have dropped, you would have had to see some counter effect.
Yeah.
That would have been the anti-George Floyd effect, where cops were rehired in the same numbers that they were supposedly fired, even though they weren't. And that's why crime has dropped so dramatically. Or what may have happened is that we've been on a steady decline of crime in this country for decades now. And we had this really strange event that completely twisted society around.
And made people desperate.
Maybe drove people crazy in some instances.
Sure.
I'm not saying like clinically, but like pressure and they are looking like I can't go to work, or like this work that I have, they're willing to subject me to death, or 1 million people have died plus in this country and nobody seems to give a crap. So why can't I go steal a car? Who knows what the mental processes were, but that it was a function of this pandemic. And now we have crime dropping, assuming the past 2 months have stayed on course for the rest of the year, to 50-year historic lows.
Yeah.
And so all of these stories, and we should say, I will bet you every single thing I own that to compare the reporting on the supposed uptick in crime and this sort of like society-wide problem versus the reports of how much it's dropped, they won't even be comparable.
Yeah. Well, there isn't footage from security cameras of executives at Target or at these other retail outfits saying in internal meetings, oh, damn, like we are taking some losses. How are we going to find a way to scapegoat this? So I know. But when it comes to like anecdotes about crime, there's endless videos if they need of people stealing things that they can play on the loop in order to freak people out. And you referenced this obviously earlier. This was the big kind of domino, the big domino to fall in like this completely bogus claim falling apart. This was an article from a few weeks ago in the Times. A national lobbying group has retracted its startling estimate that organized retail crime was responsible for nearly half the $94.5 billion in store merchandise that disappeared in 2021, a figure that helped amplify claims that the United States was experiencing a nationwide wave of shoplifting. The group, the National Retail Federation, edited that claim last week from a widely cited report issued in April after the trade publication Retail Dive revealed that faulty data had been used to arrive at the inaccurate figure.
Well, read the next paragraph, because remember, this was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and CNBC just looked into this today.
Yes. The retraction comes as retail chains like Target continue to claim that they are the victims of large shoplifting operations that have cut into profits, forcing them to close stores or inconvenience customers by locking products away. They mentioned the footage there. In fact, retail theft has been lower this year and then in most of the country than it was a few years ago, according to police data. Some exceptions, including New York City, exist, but in most major cities, shoplifting incidents have fallen 7% since 2019.
Since 2019,
pandemic,
the George Floyd effect, or whatever it is you want to call it. And we should also say, not only is this the lies that Eric Adams told to get into office, we have another example of this. Eric Adams' administration, I don't know, it was 8 months ago, made predictions that the wave of immigration was going to cost the city something like $8 billion. And it turns out that in basically what amounted to like the size of a correction in terms of how strongly it was reported, it came out the other day that actually, no, that figure was inflated by a factor of 2, right? That's when you double it.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like, understand that there was a concerted effort to exploit what happened during COVID in any way that people could, whether it was like you wanted to charge more money and claim that like it was all input costs. Well, now as we get further, away from COVID, we start to realize that inflation was largely driven by things like gouging, like, supply chain issues, that profits exceeded that of which there was an uptick in input costs. And all of this is so that people, capitalists, can make more money, can extract more money. This is, it's basically just sort of like disaster capitalism. It is price gouging across, and it's either gouging from the people who want to run against the idea that our society is less safe and more crime ridden, or want to, argue that we should have less immigration or whatever it is. I mean, the only real thing that's going on is that rents have gone through the roof. They are at incredibly high price points. Our housing stock is at an all-time low, and homelessness is up by 12%. You don't need to be some type of like magical genius to figure out why that's the case. There's a direct correlation between how much houses you have and how many people can live in the houses. Pretty easy.
And a final point on this from me. Let this be a lesson in people's media literacy, because there were a lot of folks that just ran with this because it was being reported in outlets. But when you read the details, it's the trade associations and the corporations that are making these claims about crime. And so, like, you've got to, I mean, in the same way, I feel this way when we're talking about, Israel and Gaza more broadly as well. Like, you have to analyze where this information is coming from and who is making the claim and if it's been independently verified by the source. I wish, honestly, papers were much more scrupulous about it. But at least people who are, on the left in a way, or like supposedly left of center, that should be inherent. And so I was really surprised to see how many people fell for this crap.
It's almost as fundamental as like something like Noam Chomsky or Marshall McLuhan like talked about in the 1970s of like, consider the source, but also what that source is intending to do by delivering that information to you.
Yeah.
As we always say as an example of like, if something's in Politico or in Politico Playbook, regardless of the veracity, the intention is for something to be expounded upon by a certain person. It's the same type of thing with something like this from numerous trade associations and big corporations.
Exactly.
Should we let's talk about what's happening to RFK these days. I'm not sure which one you want to start with.
I love this.
Number 12?
Okay. So I saw this last night. Crystal Ball just did a really excellent job in this clip of not letting up on really just shocking kind of denial by RFK Jr. About Israel's war crimes, and he seems to get quite irritated with her. I'll just say, as a woman, like, the vibe I get is just he didn't like being spoken to like this as a woman, by a woman. And he makes a point about privilege later on that literally I almost spit out my drink. Coming from a Kennedy, I don't want to spoil it, honestly.
All right. Well, we should just also say, I mean, like, it has been quite clear for some time that Kennedy, I think at one point he stopped following Roger Waters on Twitter to make some issue about his support for Israel, which has been really over the top. And for somebody who was arguing that we should not, and listen, I think people can have a different perspective as to how much we should be funding Ukraine's attempt to expel the occupying force of the Russian government. But I think people can have some good faith disagreements about that. But to argue on the grounds of trying to minimize war, to argue that I don't know. I mean, Russia has been, the UN just basically said, put Russia on notice. We're investigating your treatment of attacking civilians in Ukraine. To argue that this is somehow super unjust, and then to, prior to October 7th, completely ignore the dynamic that has gone on in Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and frankly, in just even the acknowledgement of how Israel was founded has been pretty astonishing. But even after October 7th, he seems adamant in his support.
Oh, it's dogmatic, and it becomes quite clear here because he denies basic facts that Crystal presents to him.
Me on when they did.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Take it.
So let's turn to a little bit of policy, and specifically the topic of Israel, obviously very much in the news right now. So President Biden's administration, they have said that they have no red lines for the state of Israel and their conduct in this war. Do you have any red lines for Israel?
Well, the red lines are that, you don't deliberately, you do everything you can, which I think Israel is doing right now, to avoid civilian casualties. But, there's collateral damage in every war, and they're fighting an implacable enemy. I mean, I don't think there's any country in the world that would go as far as Israel has gone to not invade Gaza. I mean, Israel was being bombed by Hamas, took over Gaza. Israel walked out of Gaza. There's no occupation of Gaza.
The blockade, though.
Well, there's a blockade because Hamas declared war on Israel and sent suicide bombers off. So they put up a fence. So it's there. That's like the guy who kills his parents and then throws himself on the mercy of the court because he's an orphan. For them to say that they're blockaded, they're blockaded, and it's not just Israel's blockading them; it's Egypt. Everybody has a problem with Hamas. In fact, after the 73 war, after the 67 war, Israel tried to give Hamas back to Egypt. And Egypt didn't want to take it because
Gaza.
Gaza back to Egypt. Egypt didn't want to take it because of the high level of sort of religious militant Islam that Egypt considered a threat to its own government.
Let
me just finish.
Sure.
Israel, Hamas took over in 2006.
Right.
And they immediately started shelling Israel. So they sent on average 2,000 rockets a year on civilian populations, and their charter and their public statements day after day are it's against Islamic law for them to even negotiate with Israel except as a ruse. It says that in their charter. The only satisfaction for them, the only goal, is to annihilate Israel and kill every Jew, not just in Israel, but all around the world. So Israel, instead of going in and attacking, if Mexico elected a communist government and the communist government began sending shells onto civilian populations in San Antonio and Houston and say, we're going to retake Texas, which they have a legitimate claim to, we're going to retake it. How long would it take us to go in there? It wouldn't take us very long. We would go in and we would do whatever it took to take out the people who are sending the shells. And Israel, instead of doing that, Israel did something extraordinary, which is it invested in an Iron Dome, which is to defend itself again, just to live with missiles. There's thousands, tens of thousands of Israelis that have, on that part of Israel that have been raised in bomb shelters. Who would put up with that? There's nobody in the world.
No one here is excusing the actions of Hamas, but I think you would agree that one atrocity does not justify another. So how can you hold on?
Hold on.
How can you say though? How can you say?
Calling it an atrocity.
I haven't finished my question.
Right, go ahead.
How can you say that Israel is doing everything they can to avoid civilian death, when the civilian death toll, even by Israeli estimates, and this is the low, this is the best possible number you could put on it, is 61% innocent civilians, thousands of children, thousands of women. That's worse than the combination of every 20th century conflict combined. So how can you look at that and combine with the complete siege of 2.2 million people and say that they are doing everything they can to protect civilian life?
First of all, what you said is not true. We killed 750,000 civilians in Iraq.
She's talking percentage-wise.
What?
She's talking percentage-wise.
The percentage of the average kill rate in Afghanistan, Mosul, in those battles, in modern warfare is about 8 or 9 to 1, civilians to military.
And you think that's fine? 80% civilian death? You're fine?
I don't think a single civilian death is fine. Not a single, but when we went into Germany to get out the Nazis, we killed 2 million Germans. We bombed Dresden.
Which is why, and actually there's an analysis that just came out that showed the bombing of northern Gaza has been more devastating and more destructive than our bombing of Dresden. I would also say after World War II, that's why we put in place things like the Geneva Conventions, to make sure that we did as much as we could to protect civilian life. So when you say, let me give you a specific report that you can respond to. The Washington Post, we can put this up on the screen, guys. This is the second element.
R2.
The Washington Post just reported that Israel dropped U.S. supplied white phosphorus in an attack in Lebanon in a way that is inconsistent with the laws of war, directly impacting a civilian population. Are these, now you might say, look, maybe the report's in dispute, maybe we need to go and investigate, but is this or any other of Israeli conduct in this war, is this something that you think should be investigated for potential violations of international law?
Again, if Israel dropped white phosphorus on civilian populations illegally, then they should be prosecuted for war crimes.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's strong evidence that they've done that, and Israel absolutely denies it. There are legal ways to use white phosphorus because it's used, in war, which is as a concealant. And Israel says that's what it's doing. Here's what Israel has done. Israel has calls people before they bomb them. Nobody else in the world does that. It's made 20,000 live calls. So an Arab-speaking IDF member who calls the landlord, they have the telephone numbers of everybody in Gaza. Now, there's a lot of connectivity problems, so they can't always
barely sell access.
Pause for 1 second. Are we just going to blow through why they have the phone numbers of every single person in Gaza? And they can pinpoint their location with those phone numbers. In other words, if you're placing 20,000 calls to 2 million people, how do you know which 20,000 to call? Well, because you know exactly where they are. We saw this reporting in 972 about their AI. They know exactly where they're dropping these bombs. They know exactly where they're dropping them. The number of journalists that have been killed, the number of doctors that have been killed, the number of cultural figures that have been killed in Gaza, they know exactly where they're dropping them. We're just going to blow through. They have the phone numbers of every single person there. Oh, they're not blockaded? Go ahead.
who calls the landlord. They have the telephone numbers of everybody in Gaza. Now, there's a lot of connectivity problems, so they can't always
barely cell access right now.
Let me finish. They've made 20,000 live calls with people telling, here's what's going to happen. You need to move out. In your neighborhood, on your building. They've sent 1.2 million robocalls. They've sent 1.2 million pamphlets. The pamphlets are color-coded for date and for time, so that you don't see an old pamphlet and say, oh, this won't apply to me. So people know when that building is going to get bombed. And they do something nobody else in the world does, because they invented it, which is they send in roof knockers, which is a projectile that hits the roof 2 hours before they bomb the building.
So, first of all, the claims about the individuality of Israel's war crimes are jarring to me, in that this is presented by Zionists as and right-wingers as like the uniqueness, in a sense, makes Israel more humanitarian. The uniqueness of the complete siege and apartheid in Gaza also informs your analysis of their military tactics, because this is a situation unlike we have ever seen in my life, in history, maybe in many ways, because of the apartheid, and then like not just the apartheid akin to South Africa, but the way that the population has been indiscriminately bombed. And then what he says there, when he says roof knockers, what is that a euphemism for? And he says projectiles, so he understands exactly what he's saying. Israel is so magnanimous in their unique situation there that they send a smaller bomb on top of the bombs that they're about to send in order to warn people. That's what they did, by the way, at the hospital. So, like, yes, it is unique and specific because Israel's crimes and the ethnic cleansing and how much it has been propped up by the West is also unique. I just want to get to the point where he calls Palestinians privileged.
Do something nobody else in the world does, because they invented it, which is they send in roof knockers, which is a projectile that hits the roof 2 hours before they bomb the building, to warn the people in that building to get out because they're going to bomb it. In warning the civilians, they're also warning Hamas. And so it makes it much more difficult. And, the fact there's many, many nations in the world that would just go and flatten the whole place, which Israel could do. It doesn't have to go in there and put IDF soldiers at risk in hand-to-hand combat. This is Hamas has made a stand. They're putting civilians in the way. What is Israel supposed to do? It can't leave Hamas in there.
But Bobby, I don't think we should accept that from any state, Israel or any other. And I mean, they have rendered. So hold on. They've rendered Gaza City uninhabitable at this point. And there's been reports documenting that some of the procedures that you're talking about that they used in previous wars, they're not using this time. They've emphasized this attack on quote unquote power targets, which are things like civilian infrastructure and high-rise apartment buildings, not to get Hamas, but to create a quote shock in the civilian population. In addition, as I mentioned before, you have a collective punishment of 2.2 million people who are having their access to water, food, fuel, medicine blocked right now by Israel. This also appears to be in violation of the Geneva Conventions. Do you think that it's acceptable to impose a siege on the entire civilian population in Gaza?
If there's a violation, first of all, I don't think that's happening. Let me explain. Second of all, if it violates the Geneva Convention, or if they're deliberately, at any point, anybody is deliberately targeting civilians, they should be prosecuted and they should be jailed and the key should be thrown away. And people say this, but I don't see any proof of that. Right now, people are deliberately targeting civilians.
But the government announced they were doing a complete siege on the 2.2 million.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about the siege. The siege. Now, we did for 10 years. We did collective punishment of Iraq. We actually
I'm not
killed.
trying to justify that either here.
But why are we just going after the Jews? Why, why is it only when Israel does it? Let me just finish this right now.
Our tax dollars are going
for
to
one
fund.
second. I've heard this before. I've actually gotten into this conversation, aside from the fact that I had obviously a problem with the Iraq War. But this is the same guy who says that we should not be going after Russia. Right? So, like, this argument, why is it only the Jews are singled out? Well, for 6 to 8 months, he's been saying it's been wrong for us to single out the Russians for invading Ukraine.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you think about the Ukraine, whether we should be funding Ukraine or not, the point is there's no consistency here.
I mean,
we were demonizing, according to him, Putin 6 to 8 months ago, and now the only people who get demonized are supposedly the Jews. I'm not demonizing the Jews. I happen to be very close to some Jews. Some of my best friends are Jews.
Yeah.
But Israel are not the Jews. Israel are the Israelis.
Yep. And it's also jarring to me how little he understands who he's even speaking to here. I mean, is he trying to say that in any way Crystal, who I believe began her career?
He's trying to make the argument.
In opposition to the Iraq
that
War.
nobody cares when we did it in Iraq, and therefore no one should care when Israel does it in Gaza.
Well,
now, first of all, people did care.
Yes.
The vast majority of Americans didn't. In fact, there is, I would be shocked. Not totally shocked, but if you want to do a Venn diagram of people who didn't care about what U.S. was doing in Iraq, and the people who don't care about what Israel is doing in Gaza, they wouldn't be a perfect circle, but certainly most of those people in the former would land in the latter for the most part. But the idea that somehow that justifies it, and the idea that somehow that makes the case that only people concerned are when Jews do it, people have been talking about Putin and the Russians doing it, and he's been pushing back on that.
And additionally, I mean, we now know the data makes it clear that what Israel is doing right now in Gaza is record-breaking in its brutality. Branko Markotic has a great piece in Jacobin that says the rate of killing, 13,000 of the dead, children and women. Israeli officials claim they've killed 5,000 Hamas fighters, but that's a dubious figure that would effectively mean that every single Palestinian man killed in the war has been a non-civilian, and it's even more dubious when we consider that Hamas's 30,000 fighters comprise only 1.4% of Gaza's pre-war population. Israel has already killed more women and children than all the civilians U.S. forces killed in both the first and second years of the Iraq War, and at least 9 others years after that invasion. So just to specifically tie it to the Iraq War there, let alone the journalists that you mentioned. Keep going.
Israel does. Let me just finish this right now.
Our tax dollars are going to fund what's going on, and the visuals of these children being killed and losing their parents and the rubble and the total destruction. This is something our government is backing.
I have friends in Gaza. Okay, I have a friend who is a father of 5 kids, and what he's living through right now is horrible. I have many Palestinian friends. I've been to West Bank. I've met with the Palestinian leadership. I love the Palestinian people. It's excruciating watching what's happened. But why are we blaming Israel? Why are we blaming
they're the ones
people?
Dropping the bombs?
They have
with our dollars.
They have to get at Hamas. They have to destroy Hamas. And Hamas, unfortunately, build tunnels for themselves, but they did not build bomb shelters for their people. And Israel has told people, move to the south. There's food trucks there. There's medicine there. There's fuel there.
But there's not.
It's only not there.
The area
because
they
Hamas
told them
steals
to
it.
go to is an area that is the size of LAX airport. It is a desert wasteland. There are no UN flag facilities. In fact, if you ask the Secretary General of the UN, he'll tell you there are no safe places in Gaza. You already have 1.8 million people who have been displaced from their homes. So, at what point do you say, okay, it's enough? Because the other piece of this, even if you say, and I know you're not saying this, but even if you say, I don't care about the Palestinian lives, they got to do what they got to do. It's the cost of war. What are you going to do? there's also a lot of evidence that what they're actually doing is fomenting increasing support for Hamas. Because if you think about it, if you're a kid and your parents get blown up, what kind of politics do you think you're going to have when you grow up? Isn't that going to be tremendously radicalizing and incredibly compromising to the security of Israelis alike?
So how would you get rid of Hamas?
Well,
if you're Israel.
Well, I'm not running for president of the United States, number one. But number two, I think we have a model for this in a sense from the way we went in and approached bin Laden. So it was a targeted raid. If you're actually going to do this, you do a counter-terror operation where you go in a targeted way. You create a wedge between Hamas and the civilian population. And we see how this works in the past because previously in Israeli society, when there were pathways to peace that were on the table, where the Palestinian civilian population felt that they had a chance at negotiating some sort of a peaceful outcome, guess what? Support for Hamas falls off a cliff. It's almost a one-to-one relationship with the more brutal the response from Israelis, the more support for radicalism that there is.
You can filibuster.
I'm not filibustering. You asked me a question. I'm trying to answer it.
Yeah, I think you're filibustering. You're not answering the question. You're saying drive a wedge. Well, of course Israel's trying to drive a wedge.
By offering some other path that's not terrorism and not violence.
What is that path?
It's a path to two-state solution or some sort of a just and lasting peace.
And the Palestinians not only have rejected that, but Hamas, its whole purpose was the reason that Hamas was able to get all this popular support and take over.
Pause it for one second. Because first off, before he even says this, it's a lie. It's a lie. First off, we know it has been the stated position of the Israeli government for well over a decade, maybe 15 years, almost right after Hamas came to power in Gaza, that they don't want any type of solution. We also know that the development of Hamas in the 80s was nurtured by the Israeli government to undermine a cohesive Palestinian political project because they wanted to inhibit the Palestinians from having any type of political force so that there was no way they could negotiate any type of peace settlement. There was no way for them to negotiate a two-state solution at that time because they had competing rival forces. We know that Netanyahu has stated this as a fact back in the aughts.
We have to bolster
that Hamas was the biggest asset they had in inhibiting a two-state solution.
So if these are akin to Nazis and Netanyahu is in at least not completely trying to annihilate everybody, you would think that allowing for funds to be funneled to them and explicitly saying these Nazis who want to kill all Jews, apparently according to RFK, not just in Israel and around the world, the Jewish diaspora, that, it might not be a good idea to fund them, right? If that were the case.
The Palestinian Authority begged Israel, do not pull out unilaterally, do not call for elections, because we are, we are underrepresented there. We can't win there. And so 17 years ago, Hamas won an election with 45% of the vote. We now know that half the population wasn't even born when they were elected at that time. There's certainly questions as to sort of the overall legitimacy of them taking power. But even if I stipulate that they were duly elected at that time, that was also a function of a deliberate point of the Israelis to undermine any type of cohesive political leadership for the Palestinians. And if you look at what the polling has shown in terms of support for Hamas 4 months ago versus today, and there was polling done during the 5-day ceasefire. You can go and check it out at the, where is it? The
Palestinian.
Regardless, we'll put a link to it.
Yeah.
You can see that polling. Support for Hamas through the roof. I mean, you don't need to be a genius.
Yeah. These are the people bombing us.
In fact, I've had conversations with Bobby.
Yeah.
Where the demonization, where the inviting of an enemy attack is a way of solidifying support. He knows this. He's being obtuse about it, but go ahead.
Able to get all this popular support and take over was because of its opposition to any negotiation.
Hamas just came out and said that they support Israel's PLO and recognize Israel's right to exist. On the other hand, you have the ambassador. You have the ambassador, the Israeli ambassador to the UK saying we will absolutely no to a two-state solution.
I just cannot let you tell that's just not true.
It just happened.
Ismail Haniyeh was on TV on Al Jazeera yesterday saying we're going to do this again and again and again. We will never negotiate.
Which we covered and which is disgusting. But there's no. What about the facts? But hold on. What about the fact that? What about the fact that Netanyahu and his government have said absolutely no? They built up Hamas to try to thwart any sort of Palestinian statehood. Where's the focus on that?
I'm not defending Netanyahu, and I'm not. I don't co-sign. What Netanyahu and Likud do. Israel is a divided country. 80 or 20% of the population are on the street demonstrating against Netanyahu. What I'm saying is Hamas is a criminal enterprise.
Sure.
Yes. The Palestinian, and you talk about solutions for the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are arguably the most pampered people by international aid organizations in the history of the world.
Are you kidding me?
No,
even before this war, 78% of people in Gaza said they had, not enough food to eat.
Right. And why is that? Why are you blaming Israel?
In part, it's Hamas, and in part, it's the fact that Israel imposed a blockade and talked about putting them on a diet.
If your neighbor, first of all, Israel has no obligation. Israel built 3,000 hothouses and gave them for greenhouses. That would have made Gaza completely food self-sufficient. Gave it to them as a gift. Offered to rebuild the port of Gaza to make it the Singapore of the West. Hamas said, no, we don't want you money. We don't want you ideas. And what do? The international aid.
All right. This is.
That's basically it. I just wanted to get to that part because it was a real mask off moment.
It's
Palestinians
stunning.
are the most pampered people in the world. From a Kennedy. I don't want to hear that crap. It's also a bull-faced lie. Before October 7th, 9 out of 10 of people in Gaza had difficulty accessing clean water.
50% unemployment.
Yeah. And the only way that they can get employed by the magnanimous Israelis is if they go over a checkpoint and it takes like 5 hours to go 7 miles one way. And if they're late any time, they get their status revoked and then they're unable to go over there and work.
I've got a prisoner. I've got a prisoner in my basement, but I give him 3 square meals a day.
Yeah.
I mean, well, actually not 3, 2 or 1.5, but still. And I also gave them a little pot, which they could grow stuff in. If they wanted to.
Oh, wait, I bought it.
Here, we're going to make your living on this reservation, in this refugee camp, self-sufficient. How is that? Look at what we're doing for you. I mean, this is just absurd. This is just absurd. Like, this is, I mean, when you hear these type of things, the idea that, like, they were going to make, the Israelis were going to give the Palestinians living in Gaza the opportunity to be self-sufficient. In other words, they could live as stateless, no passport holding, just individuals who couldn't travel freely, didn't have control over their power or their water. We could give them the opportunity to feed themselves and be good. Yeah. I mean, this is honestly, it's fascinating. We talked about this with Peter Beinart the other day, but the Israelis really felt, and look, I am sure that, people in like 1885 in the United States were like, you know what? It's not fair. If we were just here 50 years ago, I wouldn't have to hire people for this plantation. I'd be able to get slaves.
Yeah.
Well, I missed out. On some level, the idea for the Israelis were like, look, America did it, and we did do it. We did do it. We committed ethnic cleansing. We committed genocide. We were able to take our indigenous people and put them on reservations and basically take away any type of their political rights for an extended period of time. And we did this. And we basically got away with it. I mean,
of course,
maybe not even basically.
But they
we got
couldn't
away
live
with
stream it. They couldn't live stream it at the time, and now the genocide is being live streamed.
But progress moves forward, and the opportunity for the Israelis to do this in the same way that we did in whatever it was, whatever you want to date it, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s in this country. They wanted to do it in the 1900s, in the mid 20th century. And they had a very narrow way to even get away with it. And they didn't go that route, which was to have been far more, willing to recognize both that A, they had dispossessed and stolen the land of thousands of Palestinians, and that we're going to have to do something that maybe we don't call it reparations, but it's reparative in some fashion. And they decided at one point that no, in fact, we're not going to do that. We're going to try and model it after the way that America did with their indigenous population, and now it's not working out. And that's basically it.
Anyway, great job, Crystal. I thought that was really well done by her, even though, he kept accusing her of filibustering. And it just bothered me how she answered his question completely directly about what she would do with that military operation, or the likening it to Osama bin Laden. He said, "You're not answering my question."
Right.
I mean, it was the same exact thing. We played that clip of Owen, what's his last name? Owen, no. The British, whatever. I'm sorry if I mess up his name, but really early on, the one where I cried.
Owen Jones.
Yeah, Owen Jones.
Excuse me.
That Labour MP, after he condemned Hamas and the attacks for around 2 minutes, then decided to bring up the humanity of people in Gaza, and she repeatedly said, "You refuse to condemn Hamas," after he had just did it.
Right.
Like the amount of cognitive dissonance that people are displaying in working backwards from their lack of belief in the humanity of Palestinian people and their frickin' racism is astounding to me.
Let's just play this last clip here from number 15. We'll go out with something that's a little bit more fun.
Sure.
Things like stripping women of their right to vote.
I always have a good time with this topic.
Now here is more footage from Turning Points USA. What do they call this show?
This is AmFest.
And Turning Points USA's AmFest, where they bring together, and we also have a clip, and maybe you'll play it tomorrow, where this Fox contributor Rob Smith is at a party with TPUSA AmFest attendees, and they start basically calling them the N-word, and they start throwing gay epithets at him. So
Jason Whitlock fits right in here, seemingly.
I mean, do you know who Jason Whitlock is?
Wasn't he a pro football player? I'm joking. That was Stephen Crowder.
That
was Stephen Crowder.
Who just assumed because he was a black guy.
You're a black guy on Fox, so you must have played football, right?
Yes, he was a commentator, but now he's a full-time right-winger over there at the Blaze, and it's interesting.
Here he is at Turning Points USA, and it is really they just replay the hits and hits again. And I'm saying hits from I don't know, the late 1800s. Go ahead.
We didn't have vacuum cleaners. We didn't have.
We're going to refresh this. This is the comments are seemingly from from. We're having a little bit of technical difficulties.
I don't even think that's
there's a parade of people from TPUSA who just seem to, in some ways, try and outdo each other in revanchist and retrograde ideas. Graham Page says, "It is important to note Jason Whitlock has no family, children, never has." I'm not sure why, but go ahead.
Okay.
Vacuum cleaners. We didn't have Clorox wet wipes. It took a lot of effort to maintain a home in the 16, 17, and 1800s. Women in their proper mindset, in my view, were so respectful and so honored by the responsibility God gave them of nurturing and developing and grooming children in the womb, because that is when life begins, that women weren't sitting around saying, oh my God, if I was an advertising executive, how much happier I would be.
Pause it. I just wanted to let you know that in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, there were no advertising executives, even if you were male. I mean, I understand it would be, inappropriate and for women to be thinking like that. Although, on the other hand, it would have also been very forward thinking in that there would be advertising executives at all. Those did not happen really until the 20th century. But go ahead.
But okay, really quick. I love how
don't you want to ask my permission to say that?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sir.
Flag on the play.
I just remember a time where women didn't where'd you get that microphone? Okay.
Yeah. I got it at the store where they sell all of my new high-fangled vacuum cleaners.
Doesn't look like a broom.
I know. But like, I just like love the revelation that technology has improved. Like, I got to let him know. Back then, there were also horse and buggies, and so like men couldn't even drive very fast in the same way that women couldn't do house cleaning in the same way. It's just technological progress. But keep going.
That they weren't the primary financial providers in their home. They had the greatest responsibility that God has given: life. They were responsible for replenishing the earth and nurturing life in the womb, which is the most critical part of the development of children, what transpires in the womb. And so they have recreated this history that, oh God, it was all just sexism, and we didn't have the right to vote until Susan B. Anthony and the women's suffrage movement. And I will defend life before suffrage, because a vote used to represent the family. When we were a culture that really valued family and really understood the natural order that God intended, man serving God, woman following man who serves God, man and woman developing and nurturing children.
Okay, you pause it. I'm sorry.
Well, now I know the reason why the IMer said, important to note, Jason Whitlock has no family.
There we go.
Nor children, never has, even though that is the primary thing that we should be doing. And the vote, and I mean, I don't know. Does this mean that he shouldn't vote because he doesn't have a family?
Or is he bemoaning life before suffrage for a few people? Because he didn't say women's suffrage there. He said suffrage.
Or just broadly speaking.
It's just interesting.
In charge of their family.
The role that he plays, like in essentially saying, we should go back to this imagined past where women were totally happy with like their spouse being able to rape them and them not to be able to go to the police and things like that. Anyway, but like also what transpires in the womb is the most important thing. Just a reminder that women are not individuals in fundamentalist Christian belief systems. They are just merely vessels for life, and that is why they should not be able to control how that life happens.
Only needed one vote per household, because that vote was about the entire family, as they have destroyed our family structure and made this all an individual pursuit. Now everybody has
Wait a
to
second,
have
I want to know why I'm listening to this guy who has not sired any offspring.
Yes.
I'm sitting up here, I got 2 kids. I got to listen to this dude tell me what's what. I say, I'll take your vote, please. Because you don't got a family.
Forget your suffrage, Whitlock.
You don't got a family.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. It is unbelievable what people will be willing to say, how shameless they can be in just going up there and trying to sort of like I don't know, expand whatever it is his Q rating is for Fox or whatnot. I'm just going to go out there and say the most bat crap crazy stuff today. Now, hopefully people don't apply it to me.
Yeah.
But and they won't. And that's the bottom line. They won't. And so I know I can go out there and I can say that.
Well, I'm one of the good ones, right? You know, he gets to
I'm sorry, as
cash in.
As head of a family, I'm in charge of I got 2 kids. I just say, I'm sorry, dude.
No suffrage for you.
Back on the bench. You don't get to do any
Come back with a few kids and a wife.
Exactly.
Yeah, then we'll talk.
Yeah, exactly. I'll listen to your speech after you sire family, but not right now. All right, couple IMs, then we'll get out of here. Ramona says, I'm shocked a conservative man would defend life before suffrage. There you go. Sam asked, buckets and buckets, are you going to cover the Destiny and Cenk debate? I have to be honest with you. I was not aware of the Destiny and Cenk debate, but now that I am still just as inclined to cover it. Why would I?
It's probably a lot of yelling.
Like, we don't really cover, like, we don't.
We only covered that thing with Crystal and RFK because he's a presidential candidate. I mean, sorry, Cenk is also running for president. I forgot. I'm sorry, but like I no. But no, I'm sorry. I don't know if forget it. Just move on.
Whoopsie. Boom from Afghanistan. Sam pulling the I have a Jewish friend card. Yeah, there you go. Jay Tingle, the difference between Israel and the Jews is similar to the difference between Cubans and Guasanos in Miami. When Elian Gonzalez was held away from his father by Jorge Mas, the American public was really surprised at how kooky those folks are. Emma's distant cousin. I get the eerie feeling that given there have been 17 to 18,000 killed in Gaza, that Israel's going to try and aim for 40,000 to equal the number of Hamas.
It's 20.
I think that number is actually
20.
20,000 now.
20. Minimum.
Tumwolf Link. Happy Friends Day Wednesday, folks. Congratulations, Bradley. Here in Britain, the University of Bristol, one of Britain's so-called elite universities, announced that it will no longer play the national anthem during graduation ceremonies. The Deputy Prime Minister responded by threatening to cut off the University of Bristol's public funding. If the Free Speech Brigade could get on this, that would be great. Also, Nigel Farage finished in 3rd place on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Amazing. Jennifer from St. Louis, Trump voice. Stephen Miller, nerd. Catfish James, I remember when the war on Christmas was becoming a thing. I was working at J.C. Penney at the time. My Fox News watching father asked if I was told not to say Merry Christmas. He got offended when I laughed in his face at the absurdity. Adil, have you seen the news related to Seinfeld and family visiting IDF posing with guns? I was a big Seinfeld fan until now. Having watched the entire series more than a couple of times, I've completely removed Seinfeld from my Netflix watch list.
Yeah, I saw that. He has a reputation of being a freaking asshole, so I'm not shocked by that.
Reach around. Another word for adopted child is child. Yes, I know that. I just wanted to make it clear that, just in case anybody took issue with me saying his child. I don't even know if that child is necessarily adopted. I think he's the guardian of his nephew or something to that effect. That's why I said adopted child.
Oh, yeah.
Because the real point being that in terms of Clarence Thomas, his need to pay for private school was new.
Yeah.
That's my point. They were, I believe, childless prior to their getting guardianship of this kid. I don't know the details of that, but all I know is that it was really more talking about the timing, but your point's well taken. Gas station sushi. I have a family member who's an echo tech at a private equity owned hospital in LA. They have a lot of stories. Cost saving measures are killing the patients there. The hospital serves minorities, so no one's doing a thing about it. It's happening. I mean, many places, I think. Sam's mailman. Sam advertising his posit collar to the sub-community of dog owners who think their dog isn't cute or charismatic. Brilliant. Yeah, I guess probably... Well, you got to start with a small group of people and then just expand. Dave from Jamaica. Jesus is a heating element. Missed that at Catholic school. Light of the world, not wood stove. Yes. James from Houston. Maybe the writers of the 14th couldn't imagine that the president would ever try and overthrow the country they were head of. Well, this isn't not while you're president, but to become president. Juniper J. Does he understand how the one vote per household system worked in Mississippi before the first Civil War? My guess is no. Golden Oyster Cult, please clip the violent crimes retail theft segment. I have 2 relatives I'm going to make watch this on Christmas Eve. I have to constantly hear from them about how this crime wave every time we seem to talk. Will do. 3 more. Zane. BP gives RFK so much wriggle room, and he still sounds like a panicked fool. The idea of this buffoon could be president is preposterous. His name isn't Kennedy. He'd just be another Alex Jones regular. Yeah, it's sad to see what he's doing. June. That guy from the War on Christmas pulled a real Ron DeSantis with Sam. R.I.P. And the final IM of the day. Let's see here. Oh. Equa amicus. Pretty damn sure the Nazis modeled the Holocaust after Jim Crow and the same colonization schemes as well. Indeed. Folks, Emma will be here tomorrow. I'll be back on Friday. Emma and I will close out the year. We will open the phone lines right after we hear from Digby, who will be our last guest on in 2023. That's sort of a tradition. I think we've done that for the past couple of years. With Heather. Bradley, good job today. Flying solo. Emma, good job today. Matt, good job flying or landing or whatever you did today. Folks, thanks for joining us. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light's shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.